Sí, lo colocás ahí.
Son test, ok. Là, moi, en tout cas, le télévic a démarré. Les micros, oui, c'est opérationnel.
Cuando ya se...
Rojo. Quitar.
Ahí ya se está hablando. Cuando está en rojo se está hablando.
Si en caso. Parece muy bien.
Test canal anglais. Anglais, on passe au français.
إعلان مهم. 重要提示.
Important announcement.
Message important.
Важное объявление.
Anuncio importante.
يرجى من المتحدثين الكرام إلقاء بياناتهم بسرعة معقولة لضمان ترجمة فورية وافية وعالية الجودة. 为了帮助口译准确完整传递发言信息，请代表发言时语速不要过快。
Speakers are kindly reminded to deliver their statements at a reasonable pace to ensure complete and quality interpretation.
Il est rappelé aux orateurs qu'ils doivent présenter leur déclaration à un rythme raisonnable afin de garantir une interprétation complète et de qualité.
Напоминаем ораторам, что для того, чтобы устный перевод был полным и качественным, необходимо выступать в умеренном темпе.
Se ruega a los oradores que pronuncien sus declaraciones a un ritmo razonable para garantizar una interpretación íntegra y de calidad.
Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, I hereby declare open the 9th meeting of the 50th session of the Working Group on Universal Periodic Review. Before moving on with our business, I wish to inform you that the Division of Conference Management of the United Nations Office at Geneva has prepared an online survey for our meeting. You are all invited to take the survey concerning the quality of conference services provided at this meeting. Participants in the room may access the survey by scanning the displayed QR code using your smartphone or tablet devices, while those connected remotely can use the web link. Your feedback on the quality of conference servicing at this meeting is important to DCM in their efforts to provide more efficient and effective meetings. I would therefore like to encourage all delegates and the attendees to participate in the survey, as it will only take approximately 5 minutes. We will proceed with the new review of Honduras. Before we begin, please let me remind you that all delegations should upload their oral statements to the online system for inscription on the list of speakers event before opening of the review they intend to address. Receiving the written form of oral statement ahead of time will greatly facilitate the work of the interpreters as well as that of the troikas and the Secretariat for their timely preparation of the working group reports after each review. In accordance with the Human Rights Council Resolution 5/1, the review is based on the national report prepared by the state under review and the compilation of UN information and the summary of stakeholders' information, both prepared by the OHCHR. I now have the honor to give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Marcela Maria Arias Moncada, Ambassador Permanent Representative of the Republic of Honduras to the United Nations Office in Geneva, to introduce the delegation. Excellency, you have the floor.
Madam Vice President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it is my honor to introduce the delegation representing the Republic of Honduras at this, the fourth cycle of the Universal Periodic Review at this 50th session. The delegation is headed by the Secretary of State in the Human Rights Office, Mr. Héctor Longino Becerra Lanza, and is made up of a wide range of high-level authorities. We have a Secretary of State for the Ministry of Children, Adolescence and Family, Ms. Lices Coello, the Deputy Attorney General from the Public Prosecutor's Office, Mr. Marcio Cabañas, the Secretary from the National Congress, Ms. Silvia Ayala, the Secretary General of the Public Prosecutor's Office, Ms. Karen Funes, the Director of Human Rights and Gender Equity of the Secretary of National Defense. We have lawyer Eduardo Alemán, the Executive Director of the National Institute for the Care of Minor Offenders, Ms. Carmen Espinosa, an advisor to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Ambassador Roberto Ramos Bustos, the Director of Monitoring of Legal Conventionality of the Secretary of Women of Ministry of Women, Ms. Andrea Cruz, and the Head of the Department of Human Rights from the Secretary of Security, Mr. Edwin Cruz, who are here with us in the room today. Online, we have, through video messages, the Secretary of State for the Education Office, Mr. Daniel Esponda, the Undersecretary for Regulation in the Ministry of Health, Mr. Brian Errazo, the Director of Intersectoral Coordination from the Ministry of Social Development, Ms. Naama Avila, the Director of the Planning and Assessment Unit in the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, Mr. Franklin Fonseca, and Ms. Berta Oliva Guifarro, who is the General Coordinator of the Committee of Family Members of the Detained Disappeared in Honduras. This is known as COFADE. Over the next 3.5 hours, Honduras will be sharing its progress in terms of human rights and looks forward to a valuable and constructive involvement of all delegations in this dialogue. We reiterate our commitment to the cooperation among our nations for the promotion of peace, sustainable development, and protection of all human rights. I now give the floor to the Secretary of State of the Human Rights Office, Mr. Héctor Longino Becerra.
Microphone, please.
Es un honor dirigir.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. It's an honor to address you this morning as Secretary of State in the Ministry of Human Rights and Head of Delegation of the State of Honduras. Our presence here at this fourth UPR cycle is, in fact, an act of deep historic significance. For the first time, the state is presenting, since the coup d'etat in 2009, here before the UPR, under the management of a legitimate government, which is upheld and supported by the sovereign will of the Honduran people, democratically voiced at the polling stations. Within the framework of this restored legitimacy, the government of the Republic is currently headed by our first female president, Elis Xiomara Castro. She shouldered this position with an attitude of full transparency, openness, and deep respect for constructive dialogue. This presentation, then, is not only a formal commitment, but in fact the unequivocal demonstration of high commitment and clear willingness to continue working with all sectors to move forward in implementing actions and in unbridled recognition of human dignity. The progress that we will set out for you this morning is the direct result of the efforts and commitments of the State of Honduras to address the historic debt to human rights protection and to continue with the process of rebuilding the rule of law and the constitutional rule of law in our country. Honduras submitted a voluntary report at the beginning of 2022, and today we're submitting our national report following a process of consultation which saw participation of 55 state institutions, including the National Human Rights Institution, the National Human Rights Commission, CONADE, and relevant academic institutions. This reflects 88.34% of total or partial compliance with recommendations. As that document stipulates, there have been significant steps forward made in terms of protection of collective and individual rights of the population. Honduras increased its budget between 2021 and 2025 by over 60% to ensure quality coverage for public healthcare services. In September 2025, Honduras was declared free of illiteracy, having managed to reduce the rate to below 4% in the different departments of the country. We have improved our infrastructure in schools and educational centers by over 50%, and we have guaranteed and provided the program Merienda Escolar, which is a meal program for children and benefiting over 1 million boys and girls. The state has adopted measures to promote sustainable development and to reverse unbridled exploitation of natural resources. We have also sought not to grant mining concessions in strategic water production areas. We have repealed the law on employment and economic development zones, reaffirming territorial sovereignty and the rights of indigenous peoples and Afro-Hondurans. We've also promoted a zero deforestation by 2029 plan, which declares an environmental emergency to protect woods, protected areas, and forest life. Honduras has also declared access to electricity as a public good of national security and a human right that is economic and social in nature. We have implemented a subsidy policy which has guaranteed free energy for over 1 million people. With a view to reaching substantive equality and gender justice, we have set up instruments such as the National Policy of Women, Third Plan of Equality and Gender Justice 2023 to 2033, and the National Plan to Combat Violence Against Women, as well as other significant laws protecting women's rights. With a view to ensuring the right to individual and collective security, we have implemented a plan to combat crime, solution to crime, and the project to strengthen institutions with a gender-based approach 2025. These efforts have resulted in a reduction of homicides of 24% between 2022 and 2025. We have had 73 local municipal areas without any incidents and the lowest rate over the past 20 years. In parallel, and focusing on the right of women to live a life free from violence, we have reactivated the hotline 114, Women Living Without Fear, and we have implemented and set up the chatbot Maria. This is a free, confidential digital tool to provide immediate care and support to women victims of violence using AI. We have currently registered a reduction in the number of violent deaths of women, a fall of 26% compared to 2021. To protect the rights of persons with disabilities, we have created social programs such as the Solidarity Fund and the Hope Grant, with a view to implementing proceedings for identification and documentation in 50 municipal areas. When it comes to the national mechanism to provide protection for persons who are human rights defenders, journalists, social communicators and justice operators, we have adopted a reform which includes environment defenders as subjects of protection. 7 civil society organizations are actively participating. 2 of these are human rights defenders and 5 of them are professional guilds, and there are 2 overseers which are that provide oversight, which are the National Human Rights Institution and the Office of the High Commissioner. We have also tripled the budget and staff assigned to that mechanism, and we have adopted an executive decree to facilitate purchasing and contracting and hiring, and to make sure that protection measures are effective. Our commitment to memory, truth and justice has become a state policy. It has resulted in the adoption of the law to rebuild the rule of law and the constitutional rule of law, and the social program of care for families of martyrs of the resistance to ensure recognition and reparation for previous past violations. Along the same lines, we have set up the National Institute for Historic Memory, the first of its kind, and we have made progress in the draft bill on victims of the doctrine of national security as part of close collaboration with civil society organizations. Similarly, we would make the most of this opportunity to reiterate the openness of the state of Honduras to examining recognition of competence of international mechanisms to continue bolstering access to justice for victims of enforced disappearance and their family members. By way of conclusion, I should like to thank delegations for the advanced questions which have been and will be addressed by each of the representatives of the relevant state institution, both here in person and through virtual participation as well. On behalf of the delegation, we reiterate our firm commitment to the Universal Periodic Review Mechanism as a space for effective collaboration and cooperation, which will enable us to move forward towards ensuring all human rights for all. Thank you.
I thank you for this statement. We shall now begin our interactive dialogue. Before giving the floor to the delegations for their questions and comments, I would like to remind you that the speaking time will be 1 minute and 30 seconds for all. I wish to reiterate that issues of a political, bilateral, and territorial nature should be kept out of our deliberations. Moreover, United Nations terminology should be used when referring to states and territories. Please be reminded that only the use of the words recommend or recommendation will ensure that the relevant parts of our statements are included in the recommendation section of the Working Group report. Also, allow me to recall that the Human Rights Council strongly rejects any act of intimidation or reprisal against individuals and groups who cooperate or have cooperated with the United Nations and its representatives and mechanisms in the field of human rights. We will now begin with the list of speakers. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lebanon.
Thank you, Mrs. Vice President. Lebanon warmly welcomes the high-level delegation of Honduras and commends its constructive engagement with the Universal Periodic Review Mechanism and its close cooperation with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Lebanon also recognizes the state's efforts to strengthen social protection systems, alleviate poverty, promote the right to food, and enhance livelihoods in rural and drought-prone areas, and to advance environmental and climate resilience, particularly for indigenous people and other vulnerable populations. Always in the spirit of constructive dialogue, Lebanon would like to recommend that Honduras, 1, sustain and deepen progress in combating food insecurity through inclusive and sustainable agricultural programs prioritizing women, youth, and marginalized groups in rural, drought-prone, and indigenous community areas. 2, reinforce the implementation of environmental and climate change strategies in line with the principles of climate justice, human rights, and the protection of indigenous people and environmental defenders. 3, intensify efforts to prevent and combat trafficking in persons, with particular attention to victim identification, assistance, and regional cooperation. Lebanon wishes Honduras every success in the implementation of the recommendations arising from this review. I thank you, Mrs. Vice President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lithuania.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Lithuania welcomes the delegation of Honduras and thanks it for its national report. We commend the progress made by Honduras in high-profile cases concerning human rights defenders. We positively note the legislative reforms adopted since the last UPR cycle to strengthen and promote the protection of journalists and human rights defenders. We also welcome the law on shelter homes for victims of gender-based violence, aiming to protect abused women and their children. However, considering harassment and a high number of attacks targeting human rights defenders and journalists in Honduras, we are deeply concerned about their vulnerability and safety. Lithuania would like to make the following recommendations. 1. Guarantee effective protection of human rights defenders, investigate all allegations of intimidation and assault against them, bring the perpetrators to justice and accountability. 2. Ensure full respect for freedom of expression, ensure prompt and independent investigations into all threats and attacks against journalists. 3. Take action to eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls, including through the adoption and implementation of a comprehensive law on violence against women. We wish Honduras all success in the current UPR. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malaysia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Malaysia commends Honduras for the presentation of its national report and for undertaking several initiatives to promote and protect human rights since the last UPR cycle. In the spirit of constructive engagement, Malaysia recommends the following. First, promote vocational and entrepreneurship programs for women and youth in post-conflict and low-income areas. Second, invest in rural economic development and sustainable agriculture to generate employment and reduce inequality. And third, expand universal health coverage through mobile health units and strengthen the supply of essential medicines. In conclusion, Malaysia wishes Honduras a successful review. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Maldives.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Maldives warmly welcomes the high-level delegation from Honduras to this fourth cycle review and thanks them for their presentation today. The Maldives welcomes Honduras' adoption of the National Policy for Early Childhood and Adolescence 2024 to 2033, which establishes a comprehensive framework for prevention and care of children and adolescents. We also commend Honduras for reducing the school dropout rate from 9.7 to 2.4% between 2022 and 2023. In constructive spirit, the Maldives makes the following two recommendations. 1. Accede to the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child on a communications procedure. 2. Take specific steps to protect coastal communities and densely populated areas from sea level rise and flooding. We wish Honduras a successful review. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Marshall Islands by video.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Republic of the Marshall Islands welcomes the delegation of Honduras and thanks them for the presentation of the report. We are encouraged by Honduras' efforts towards the safeguarding of the rights of children, notably with the revival in 2023 of the comprehensive system for the protection of the rights of children and adolescents. We look forward to seeing the government maintain momentum in this regard. However, we remain concerned despite some positive progress by the alarming levels of violence and intimidation towards journalists and environmental and human rights defenders.
Apologies, the sound quality is too poor for interpretation purposes.
Honduras upholds its human rights obligations. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, we recommend the following. 1. Strengthen and adequately fund the national system for the protection of journalists and human rights defenders to effectively prevent and investigate attacks against them. 2. Continue its efforts to advance the rights of women, including by ratifying the optional protocol to CEDAW. 3. Consider implementing a comprehensive legal framework for combating gender discrimination in line with international standards. And 4. Adopt human rights-based and gender-responsive approaches in environmental, climate change, and disaster risk reduction policies. We wish the delegation every success during its fourth UPR cycle. Como tada, and I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mexico.
Gracias. Thank you, Madam Vice President. We welcome the delegation of Honduras and we thank the delegation for the report presentation. We recognize efforts to combat human trafficking and to permit the use and sale of the emergency contraceptive pill. Constructively and respectfully, Mexico recommends that Honduras, 1, adopt the necessary constitutional and legal reforms to permit same-sex marriage, as well as to ensure the right to recognition of gender identity of trans persons. 2, accede to the optional protocol of CEDAW, criminalize spousal violence, and broaden the network of specialized shelters for women and girls victims of gender-based violence, legalize abortion as a minimum in cases of rape, incest, risk for life of the pregnant woman, and severe fetal malformation. 3, ratify ILO Convention 189 on domestic workers, and broaden labour legislation coverage and social security to include workers in the informal sector. We wish Honduras every success in this UPR cycle.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Montenegro.
Madam Vice President, Montenegro welcomes the distinguished delegation of Honduras and its constructive engagement with the UPR. We recognize the government's commitment to institutional transformation, social justice, and the promotion of human rights. We welcome the drafting of the public policy for the promotion and protection of human rights and the National Action Plan to integrate human rights into national planning and budgeting. We also commend the 2022 Memorandum of Understanding with the United Nations to establish an international commission to combat corruption and impunity, a crucial step towards strengthening governance and building public trust. We also acknowledge efforts to address trafficking in persons, violence against women and the girls and child labor, yet remain concerned about the persistently high levels of femicide, domestic violence, and structural impunity. We are further concerned about threats and violence against human rights defenders, activists, journalists, judges, and vulnerable communities. Montenegro recommends to Honduras, 1, adopt the special comprehensive act against all forms of violence against women and ensure its effective implementation, including the expansion of specialized shelters, and 2, intensify efforts to eliminate the worst forms of child labor, particularly in agricultural, mining, fishing, and domestic service sectors through stronger enforcement and victim remedies. We wish Honduras every success in the review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Namibia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Namibia extends a warm welcome to the esteemed delegation of Honduras and thanks them for presenting their national report. We commend Honduras for taking notable steps to further strengthen the protection, promotion, and upholding of all human rights through various legal, legislative, and institutional reforms. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, Namibia wishes to offer the following recommendations. 1, become a party to the optional protocol to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. 2, step up efforts to increase the participation of women in all spheres of life, specifically in politics and decision-making positions in the public and private sectors. And 3, step up efforts to formulate a legislative framework and implement public policies to guarantee the exercise of the rights of persons with disabilities. We wish Honduras a successful review. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Nepal.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Nepal warmly welcomes the delegation of Honduras to the 4th cycle of UPR and thanks them for presenting the national report. We appreciate the constructive engagements of Honduras with the human rights mechanisms and its efforts to implementing the recommendations of previous cycles. We take good note of the measures taken by Honduras in reducing unemployment, reforming the labor market, upholding labor rights, and promoting decent jobs. Equally noteworthy is the Brother Sister Come Home program aimed at promoting economic and social integration of the returnee migrants. In a constructive spirit, we offer the following 2 recommendations to Honduras. 1, strengthen measures to ensure effective social protection to all, particularly women, children, senior citizens, and vulnerable communities. 2, continue efforts towards combating gender-based violence and promote gender equality in all walks of life. We wish Honduras all success in its UPR. I thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kingdom of the Netherlands.
Gracias, señora vicepresidenta. Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. The Kingdom of the Netherlands thanks the delegation of Honduras for the presentation of the national report. The Netherlands congratulates Honduras for its efforts to lift the ban on emergency contraceptive pills for better protection of the health and lives of women and girls. The Netherlands recognizes the challenges regarding high levels of violence and securing the human rights of vulnerable and marginalized groups. The Netherlands constructively recommends Honduras to 1, reactivate and strengthen the national protective mechanism of human rights defenders through sufficient funding and agile mechanisms for implementation based on inclusion and consultation of civil society. 2. Implement a protocol for differentiated care for LGBTIQ+ users of the security and justice system, taking a rights-based and sexual diversity approach for the collection of data. On violence perpetrated against these individuals. The Netherlands wishes the Republic of Honduras every success with this 4th UPR cycle. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Norway.
Madam Vice President, Norway welcomes the adoption of the Safe House Act for victims of gender-based violence and the law for the selection of candidates to the Supreme Court. However, we remain concerned about the high level of violence, threats, killings, and arbitrary detention faced by human rights defenders, and the generalized impunity of these cases. Norway recommends that Honduras, 1, ensure free and fair elections for all, upholding constitutional rights and avoiding extensions of the state of exception. 2, strengthen the national system for the protection of human rights defenders, journalists, social communicators and justice operators by providing sufficient resources, trained personnel and ensuring effective risk response. 3, ensure independent investigations and accountability for crimes against human rights defenders, journalists, indigenous peoples, Afro-descendants and LGBT+ persons. 4, implement the Safe House Act and law against gender-based violence. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Paraguay.
Madam Vice President, we welcome the delegation of Honduras and thank them for their report. We value their efforts for the implementation of recommendations from the previous cycle and encourage them to take all necessary measures to address the remaining challenges to human rights. To follow up with our recommendations, we hail the progress made in policies for addressing the challenges for people on the move, in particular the creation of the Migratory Governance Council and the Protocol for Families, providing temporary protection. We respectfully recommend that 1, they consider joining the optional protocol to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child on a communications procedure, and the ILO Domestic Workers Convention of 2011, ILO Convention 189. 2, that it garner efforts to develop a legislative and institutional framework and a comprehensive strategy to guarantee the right to adequate food and nutrition and try to combat malnutrition. 3, that it consider establishing programs to support children to leave gangs and reintegrate into society. And 4, continue strengthening its national implementation mechanism for this report and follow up, considering the possibility of receiving cooperation to this end. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Peru.
Madam President, Peru welcomes the delegation of Honduras and thanks them for the presentation. In a constructive spirit, we recommend that when they redouble efforts to guarantee the effective application of the Act for the Prevention, Care and Protection of Internally Displaced Persons with appropriate resources and adequate interinstitutional coordination that guarantees the full enjoyment of human rights for IDPs. 2, that it step up measures geared at preventing the sale and exploitation of children, particularly by organized criminal groups, bearing in mind that there should be a focus based on protecting the rights of girls, boys and adolescents. 3, that it consider adopting measures to improve women's access to formal employment, that it broaden protection measures for those working in the informal economy, and that it effectively oversee the principle of equality and a fair wage for work of equal value. We wish Honduras the best in this UPR cycle, and that we hope that our recommendations can contribute to the enjoyment of human rights in their country. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Philippines.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Philippines warmly welcomes the high-level delegation of Honduras. We laud the targeted human rights education and training programs for personnel of the Ministries of Security and Defense and the Public Prosecution Service. We also positively acknowledge the significant steps taken to advance the Sustainable Development Goals, such as the conditional cash transfer programs and establishment of the Ministry of Social Development. The sustained progress allows us to offer the following recommendations. 1. Continue to strengthen legislative and policy frameworks to combat violence against women and girls, including improved access to justice and support services for victims and survivors, and continuous awareness-raising initiatives. 2. Sustain justice sector reforms to improve the administration and delivery of justice services to all, thus strengthening the rule of law. And 3. Step up efforts to address the challenges faced by indigenous peoples and Afro-descendant population, particularly to their rights to health and education. We wish Honduras all success in this review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Poland.
Madam Vice President, Poland thanks Honduras for presentation of its national report. We acknowledge activities undertaken by Honduras in order to implement recommendations accepted during the previous cycle of the UPR. Poland recommends Honduras to 1. Ensure protection for members of the judiciary, prosecutors and other professionals involved in the administration of justice so that they can perform their duties safely and independently. 2. Take urgent measures to guarantee effective protection and assistance for human rights defenders, journalists, trade unionists, members of indigenous communities who are subjected to acts of violence and intimidation. 3. Combat the root causes of violence against children, which included poverty and recruitment by gangs. We recognize that Honduras has been implementing the National Security Plan for combating crime, focusing on strengthening the prison system, investigation and prosecution. We welcome that a 90.1% reduction in homicides has been observed in the country between 2022-25. In this context, we encourage the authorities on Honduras to implement human rights-based approach while combating crime and protecting public order. We wish Honduras a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Portugal.
Madam Vice President, Portugal welcomes the delegation of Honduras and thanks it for the presentation of its national report. We welcome the inclusion of human rights education into the Ministry of Defense's curricula for members of the armed forces on the freedoms of expression, association, and assembly. Portugal recommends that Honduras 1. Signs and ratifies the optional protocol to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women and the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child on a communications procedure. 2. Strengthens access to quality education for all children, especially in rural and marginalized communities, by increasing public investment in schools, training of teachers, and implementing inclusive educational programs. And 3. Ensures the budgetary and operational autonomy of the National Human Rights Commissioner, including by providing sufficient resources to its regional offices, so that it can effectively monitor discrimination and attacks against human rights defenders, journalists, and LGBTI persons. Portugal wishes Honduras a successful review.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Republic of Korea notes with appreciation the continued efforts of Honduras to implement the recommendations received during its third cycle. In particular, we commend the government of Honduras for its action in combating crimes, preventing sexual exploitation and human trafficking, and supporting victims, with a view to ensuring the right to life, liberty, and security for its population. Nevertheless, my delegation remains concerned by reports of a prolonged state of emergency that bypassed the constitutional process requiring consideration by National Congress. We are also concerned that journalists and human rights defenders have been subjected to actual violence and intimidation, and that gender-based violence, including femicide and domestic violence, has continued. In this vein, we would like to recommend the following. 1. ensure that any measures introduced under the state of emergency are strictly necessary, proportionate, temporary, and subject to judicial review. 2. Adopt effective measures to prevent the misuse of criminal code against journalists and human rights defenders and address impunity by conducting prompt, effective, impartial, and thorough investigation into human rights violations committed against them. 3. Redouble its effort to prevent and address all forms of gender-based violence, particularly violence against women and girls. We wish Honduras a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Romania.
Madam Vice President, Romania welcomes the delegation of Honduras and wishes it a successful outcome of this review. We appreciate Honduras' engagement with the UPR process and the efforts made in strengthening the human rights institutional framework, in ensuring historical memory, truth, justice, reparation, and non-repetition, and with respect to the protection of economic and social rights. Promising measures have been taken also with regard to environment protection, education, combating organized crime and corruption. Romania constructively recommends Honduras to 1. Take effective measures to guarantee protection and assistance for human rights defenders and journalists, and design and implement a due diligence protocol for the investigation of offenses committed against them. 2. Combat impunity, ensure that investigations are prompt, effective, impartial, and thorough, and guarantee effective access to justice for everyone. 3. Adopt legislation prohibiting all forms of violence and discrimination against women and girls, and amend the criminal code to increase the sentences for femicide and to specifically criminalize marital rape. Romania encourages the national authorities to keep further their commitments to human rights protection and to implement the recommendation addressed during this session. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Russian Federation.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. We welcome the delegation of Honduras and we thank them for their report. Despite the unprecedented economic crisis and the worsening humanitarian situation, we believe the human rights situation in the country to be stable. We positively evaluate the efforts taken by the government, especially to support deported migrants. And we believe that they are attempting to solve the root causes of the situation and ensure that development is equal. And we hope that the unilateral sanctions will be lifted. We support their efforts to ensure the rights of their citizens, especially to education, social protection, and healthcare. In this regard, we note the reestablishment of hospitals and schools, as well as the renewal of rural support programs. We recommend that Honduras continue to work to improve their national legislation, especially in order to ensure human rights and liberties. We recommend that they continue to reduce the poverty level and support vulnerable populations, as well as ensure that there's access to education, including through improving the school infrastructure in rural areas. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Serbia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Republic of Serbia welcomes the delegation of Honduras at the UPR session and thanks you for presenting its national report. Serbia commends Honduras for the progress made since the third UPR cycle, its engagement with international human rights mechanisms, and its participation as a member of the Human Rights Council. We welcome the drafting of long-term human rights policies for promoting and protecting human rights, as well as the establishment of the National Interinstitutional Committee for addressing social conflicts from a human rights and gender perspective. We would like to offer Honduras the following recommendations. 1. Adopt a comprehensive law on gender-based violence and strategies to combat gender-based and domestic violence. 2. Strengthen parental rights, specifically the right to choose the form of education and moral and religious upbringing of their children. And 3. Ensure the right to inclusive education for all persons, including persons with disabilities. Serbia wishes Honduras a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sierra Leone.
Madam Vice President, we extend a very warm welcome to Mr. Hector Lanza, Secretary of State for Human Rights and the delegation of the Republic of Honduras. In a constructive dialogue, we offer the following recommendations. 1. Protect and promote the rights of indigenous peoples and Afro-Hondurans, ensuring equal access to education, employment, and social services. 2. Strengthen public health measures and disease control programs to enhance the country's capacity to respond to health challenges, and 3, intensify efforts to eliminate systemic discrimination against women and girls and promote their equal participation in education, employment, and decision-making processes. Sierra Leone commends Honduras for its strong commitment to advancing the rights to education. This commitment is evident through the provisions of 3 years of free and public pre-primary education, as well as 11 years of free and compulsory primary and secondary education as mandated by law. We also acknowledge Honduras' proactive efforts to strengthen access to health care through community health programs and its commitment through progress in implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, prioritizing 13 of the 17 goals, and the Bicentennial Plan 2022 and 2026. We also note the government's commitment to maintaining debt stability, which creates fiscal space for poverty reduction. We extend our best wishes to the Republic of Honduras for the successful implementation of its accepted recommendation, and I thank you, Vice President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Singapore.
Madam Vice President, Singapore welcomes the participation of the Republic of Honduras in the UPR process. We commend the ongoing efforts of Honduras to promote and protect its people's human rights, in particular in reducing poverty and concretely improving living conditions for thousands of families. In addition, we welcome the strengthened social support policies in promoting the rights of vulnerable groups, especially women and children. In this regard, Singapore recommends that Honduras first continue efforts to improve access to health and education, especially in the rural areas. Second, ensure the effective implementation of its National Drinking Water and Sanitation Plan 2022 to 2030 to enhance access to safe drinking water and sanitation services. And third, continue to improve national legislation regarding ensuring gender equality and eradicating violence against women. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Slovakia.
Madam Vice President, Slovakia welcomes the delegation of Honduras and its national report. We appreciate efforts made to address human rights challenges and the progress achieved. We welcome the ratification of the Inter-American Convention to Prevent and Punish Torture in 2024, as well as strengthening of human rights institutions as reflected in increased budget allocations of the Ministry of Human Rights. Slovakia offers the following recommendations. First, to ratify the optional protocol of the Convention on the Rights of the Child on a Communications Procedure, an optional protocol to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Second, to continue with efforts to prevent and eliminate child labor and to adopt further measures in this area where necessary. Third, to strengthen child protection systems, including psychosocial support and reintegration programs for children affected by deportation, trafficking, or exploitation. We wish Honduras a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Slovenia.
Thank you. Slovenia commends the delegation of Honduras for the national report and the commitment to the UPR process. We commend Honduras for its efforts to carry out human rights education and training courses for law enforcement officials and armed forces. Slovenia took note of the efforts and measures undertaken by the government to protect human rights defenders and journalists. However, we remain concerned by the killings, attacks, harassment, and threats against journalists and human rights defenders, especially land and environmental defenders. Slovenia would like to recommend to Honduras to strengthen the national protection mechanism and to allocate sufficient resources for the effective protection of human rights defenders and journalists. While we welcome that government had lifted a ban on access to emergency contraception, we recommend to the government to decriminalize abortion and to ensure safe, legal abortions, particularly in cases where women's life is in danger. I thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished delegation to address observations and comments that have been raised so far. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. Mr. Marcio Cabañas-Calillo, the prosecutor on the Public Prosecution Service, is going to take the floor. Honourable representatives of states parties, distinguished members of delegations and observers, warm greetings from the Public Prosecution Service of Honduras. As part of the institutional strengthening process, the Public Prosecution Service has been embracing a transparent strategy for hiring new prosecutors, detectives, and administrative personnel to bolster the institution. In terms of forensics, we have focused on a mobile mortuary facility in the Department of Lloro and have made progress in building a new headquarters in Choluteca. Furthermore, we have forensic labs in Tegucigalpa and San Pedro Sula, which were remodeled to improve scientific identification and dignified treatment of victims and their families. The Directorate has also focused on identifying persons who have passed away in the migration route, applying the protocol for searching for disappeared persons, and reaffirm the institutional commitment to scientific truth, dignity, and justice. In terms of combating corruption, the Technical Agency for Criminal Investigation, through the Investigation and Crimes Against Public Administration Department, has focused on restructuring and strengthening, gearing itself up to optimize its operative capacity through incorporating specialized personnel and technical resources in coordination with special prosecutors. This process has involved broadening technical capacities and coordinating with prosecutors' offices with a whole host of institutions that are combating corruption, as well as the special prosecutors' offices. We have also prioritized the training of prosecutors and police, where 250 public servants were trained in electoral issues, criminal issues, human rights, with a human rights-based approach. The Special Prosecutor for Human Rights has acted in the face of excessive use of force by security agents, prosecuting in 2021 7 cases of torture, 14 cases of cruel or inhuman treatment, 7 of dawn raids, and 16 of unjust deprivation of liberty. And there were technical protection committees involved, as well as journalists and justice operators. The Special Prosecutor for Protecting Human Rights, journalists and social communicators, has conducted a number of operations, including cases where there have been physical aggressions against journalists during their work. In terms of protection for children and women, we have a number of booths that are set up in a playful area to avoid any re-victimization of children and adolescents. We have the Commission for Child Sexual Abuse and have established 715 indictments in this field between 2021 and 2025. In terms of sexual crimes, the Public Prosecution Service in 2025 adopted the Ibo-American protocol for the investigation into sexual violence. This is endorsed by the IAMP, strengthening the institutional capacity to investigate such cases. In terms of indigenous peoples and Afro-Hondurans, there was a new headquarters for the prosecutor for ethnicities, and Hope and Intibucá, benefiting 17 municipal areas. In terms of trafficking in persons, between 2020 and 2024, through the Unit Against Trafficking, Sexual Exploitation and Smuggling in Persons, there were 201 indictments presented and 126 convictions. From 2021 to 2025, the Interinstitutional Commission Against Sexual Exploitation rescued 354 victims. Finally, the Public Prosecution Service is pleased to inform that for the first time, it's coordinating with the National Mechanism and Council for Defenders of Human Rights and Journalists. Ladies and gentlemen, the Public Prosecution Service in Honduras is making headway towards managing their services based on transparency and respect for human rights. Next, the virtual participation of Ms. Berta Oliva Ibarra, the General Coordinator of the Committee for family members of the detainees or those who disappeared in Honduras, COFADE for its acronym. My name is Berta Oliva Ibarra. The interpreters apologize, but the quality of the sound in the video is inappropriate for interpretation.
Sufrimos un violento y sangriento golpe militar de Estado. Retrocedió Honduras en temas de derechos humanos y en democracia formal y real. A partir del 2021, se ha iniciado un proceso de reencuentro con el país, con la patria, con lo que quedó después de ese huracán, de ese fenómeno político que vivimos. Y esto nos ha hecho asumir algunas responsabilidades sin ser responsables. Es por el amor que tenemos por la vida, por la justicia, por la libertad, por la memoria. Hemos esperado este tiempo actual. Nos hemos sentado con las diferentes autoridades, especialmente con el Ministerio de Derechos Humanos, para hacer nuestros aportes e impulsar algunas iniciativas de ley que están en el Congreso Nacional, que las hemos interpuesto en el Congreso Nacional, como es la Ley de Cumplimiento de las Obligaciones Internacionales de Derechos Humanos con las víctimas de la Doctrina de Seguridad Nacional 1980-1993. Estamos incorporadas de lleno en esta demanda porque creemos que si la propuesta de ley se aprueba en el Congreso, que es una cuenta pendiente que aún hay, Honduras podrá hablar de un antes y un después en materia de derechos humanos, sencillo, abarra los 5 pilares de la justicia transicional. Pero también hemos estado y hemos trabajado e impulsado la ley que realmente vale la pena estudiarla e interpretarla e implementarla en toda su dimensión, que es la ley de la deconstrucción del Estado constitucional y de derecho para que los hechos no se repitan. Esa es una ley donde podríamos abordar el pasado y podríamos abordar el presente. Es impresionante en este momento, en la coyuntura actual, que a pesar que hay líneas de trabajo con las diferentes instancias del gobierno que tienen que ver con el tema de derechos humanos, como ser la apuesta que le hemos dado o la importancia que le hemos dado a educar para el nunca más. Hemos coincidido con el Ministerio de Educación para que se aborde desde temprana edad escolástica la memoria como base fundamental para contribuir a que los hechos no se repitan. De igual manera, hemos estado trabajando con el Ministerio de Cultura, porque entendemos que la memoria es parte de la cultura y en ese sentido hemos estado impulsando con la Procuraduría General de la República el cumplimiento de las sentencias internacionales y los acuerdos de solución amistosa que se han generado por violaciones a los derechos humanos. Y se han estado implementando todos los acuerdos y parte de la sentencia. No hay duda que falta por hacer trabajo mucho más profundo en temas de derechos humanos para ir creando una cultura de derechos humanos, no solo desde la cuesta de las organizaciones de derechos humanos, de las víctimas y de los movimientos sociales, sino una cultura desde las instituciones del Estado para que no se repitan los hechos que vivimos, que sufrimos, que demandamos y reclamamos desde los años 80, graves violaciones a los derechos humanos, que es una deuda pendiente que el Estado tiene. Por eso es necesario la aprobación de la ley que antes mencioné, pero igual es necesario que el Estado de Honduras le hace falta la aceptación de la competencia del Comité contra la Desaparición Forzada. Es necesario tomar estas propuestas de orden internacional para impulsarlo a nivel nacional con una mirada holística y limpia el tema de derechos humanos. Muchas gracias.
Tiene la palabra.
I give the floor to Ms. Lisette Andina Gomez. Thank you. Secretary of State, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. Since the presentation of its report, Honduras has been bolstering its institutions with the creation of the Ministry for Children, Adolescents and Family, including the government's cabinet, so that it can play a protagonist role in the system Through the comprehensive system, we have established 201 municipal councils that represent 67% of the territory. We are driving through the implementation of the children's policy through intersectoral commissions looking at 4 priorities: early childhood, prevention of violence, deinstitutionalization, and human mobility. Each one has an operational plan underway. We are developing a national model for caring for early childhood in 100 municipal areas, which includes training on preventing physical punishment and humiliating treatment. This is tailored to those who are members of municipal councils, healthcare personnel, and teachers. In coordination with the Ministry on Security, we have set up 60 municipal observatories for citizens' safety and coexistence, and these produce evidence and studies that contribute to raise awareness about any violations or vulnerabilities and to help guide people towards effective responses. On children's rights, we've set up the national census for residential areas for alternative care, and there are 136 homes which host 3,900 children. To this end, we passed the protocol for protecting children living in institutions, and this fulfills the role of the right to grow up in a family. In the last number of years, 1,200 children have returned safely to their families. With a view to raising awareness on the harmful impact of violence on children's development, we launched national campaigns such as Families Who Protect, or Love Does Not Harm, or Protection and Love in Each Home. And we managed to reach 600,000 views of these campaigns. The state protects the comprehensive development of children, and legislation prohibits marriage before 18. In the face of early marriage, we are working on trying to strengthen messaging through education, justice, and training in rights. The Public Prosecution Service has a specialized technical team trained against child sex abuse, with participation from prosecutors, investigators, and forensic experts, with a view to improving the lodging of complaints, protecting victims, and avoiding any harmful actions. For its part, the Supreme Court of Justice, through its program Open Justice, is rolling out actions to focus on children, with a view to making it easier to issue sentences and improve the justice system's response. To guarantee the rights of the population who are on the move, we have developed a strategy for migrants which looks at giving specialized treatment and effective responses for children who are migrating, who are displaced because of violence, or who are returning. And this involves a range of actors with local government, public institutions, international corporations, civil society. The Center for Returnee Migrants, Berlin, provides humanitarian assistance, medical care, psychological care, food tokens, and seed capital for families. And in the last 2 years, we have cared for 10,800 children, achieving reintegration into the community of 1,700 of this figure. The state of Honduras has made significant progress, which helped to bolster the national protection system, and we are committed to continue working to guarantee the full enjoyment of the rights for children and adolescents. Thank you very much. I now am going to show the video from Daniel Enrique Esponda Velázquez, who is the Secretary of State in the Ministry of Education.
En relación a las recomendaciones hechas por esta comisión.
Regarding the recommendations given by the Commission, or the Committee of Government for the President Xiomara Castro, we have to say that this administration received a budget for each one of its fiscal years, and we finished this year with more than 29 billion lempiras. The interpreters apologize, but unfortunately, the sound quality is too poor for interpretation, and in addition, there's background music.
Cada centro educativo, a cada preescolar, a cada escuela, a cada centro de segunda enseñanza y de tercer ciclo, donde la comunidad educativa junto al director administran estos fondos para comprar material didáctico, insumos pedagógicos, hacer reparaciones mínimas. Y con esto garantizar el derecho a la educación de millones de niños y de niñas en nuestro país. Por otro lado, el programa de la alimentación escolar es uno de los programas más exitosos en nuestra región, ya que está cubriendo desde el nivel de educación inicial, educación media, en el tercer ciclo y educación básica. Eso está permitiendo que más de 1.2 millones de escolares de las zonas más pobres y más remotas del país están tomando alimentos todos los días en nuestras escuelas. En función de estos presupuestos, más los presupuestos adicionales.
Regarding the additional budgets that are provided by the
que ronda los 2.000 millones de lempiras que la presidenta Castro ha asignado a las corporaciones municipales de todos los departamentos del país, hemos atendido más de 5.500 centros educativos que han sido reconstruidos. Uno de los problemas más graves que encontramos en esta administración de la presidenta Xiomara Castro fue la magnitud de los centros educativos destruidos, no solamente por el nivel de destrucción, sino por la cantidad de centros destruidos. Esta decisión, que no obedece a ninguna posición partidaria, ha garantizado que hayamos reconstruido más de la mitad de los centros educativos que encontramos destruidos. Además de los programas sociales, la ley de financiamiento y la reconstrucción de la infraestructura escolar, nos ha permitido mejorar algunos indicadores. Los datos de la pandemia del COVID-19 para el año 2021 no eran nada alentadores y nuestro país venía perdiendo de manera sostenida escolares de la matrícula histórica. Es así que nosotros recibimos un índice de reprobación en el año de deserción en el año 2022 que superaba el 3% y ahora mismo lo hemos reducido casi en un 1%. Es decir, menos del 2.42% de nuestros estudiantes son excluidos del sistema educativo, mejorando así los rendimientos de la matrícula y mejorando también así la retención de la misma. La presidenta Castro ha puesto especial énfasis en los que habían estado excluidos del sistema educativo. Por un lado, los estudiantes de educación inicial, dado que no existía una política sólida de educación inicial. Hoy con los centros de atención integral a la primera infancia estamos construyendo una política para que el pueblo pueda reconocer la educación de la primera infancia como un derecho humano. Y por otro lado, teníamos alrededor de casi 700.000 personas que no sabían leer y escribir. Es así que a través de nuestro programa de alfabetización, José Manuel Flores Arguijo, que hemos atendido prácticamente 500.000 de personas. Alrededor de un poco más de 1.000 de estos hondureños alfabetizados que no sabían leer y escribir rebasan los 90 años de edad. Y alrededor del 30% son adultos mayores que rebasan los 60 años. Y con esto hemos alcanzado un índice por debajo del 4% de analfabetismo en nuestra nación, pasando de un 13.5 a un 3.7. Eso para nosotros es uno de los logros más significativos, porque hemos ido en búsqueda de los que históricamente habían estado excluidos del derecho a la educación. Obedeciendo a nuestro segundo pilar, que es construir un sistema educativo que erradique la pobreza, la desigualdad y que construya democracia, hemos implementado la clase de educación cívica morazánica. Esta clase es fundamental para desarrollar la conciencia del ciudadano y que toda la población de Honduras pueda luchar, pero además de ello pueda procurar sus derechos.
A continuación,
I now call on the virtual participation of Mr. Brian Martina Raso Munoz, Under Secretary of State in the Ministry of Health.
Desde el sector salud, en el componente de financiamiento.
In the healthcare sector, when it comes to finance, we have stepped up the budget between 2021 and 2024 in 45%. When we break this down, we also see a budget increase for hospitals of over 98%. And in sections such as medicine and inputs in healthcare technology, compared to 2021, we see a fourfold increase of investment in this area. We also have seen investment in trying to break down barriers of access to healthcare, such as eradicating co-payment at the end of 2024. Another segment in terms of human resources is the twofold increase in the number of workers in the healthcare sector, going from around 15,000 workers to over 35,000 mid-2025. We've established a program to increase access to coverage through broadening the number or expanding the hours where healthcare is available, and including the weekend. This has allowed us to reach a third of all of the municipal areas of Honduras. We've also been investing in the network across the country, prioritizing the poorest townships and towns, remodeling 68 new infrastructure areas, providing first-level health care with an investment above $24 million. This has made it possible for us to provide 24-hour care in emergency and reaching 1.6 million Hondurans. Furthermore, given the gaps in care for neonatal and the rates of neonatal mortality, we have been investing strategically of over $28 million in building 5 neonatal units. And then finally, in terms of hospitals, we are building 8 hospitals, including one urgently because of a fire that took place in April 2024, and this involves investment of over $500 million. Turning to sexual and reproductive rights, the country has been reducing the indicators on maternal mortality robustly, showing a drop in mortality rates of 27% between 2023 and 2024. And looking at 2024, we are also seeing a drop of over 30% compared to the previous year. This has been thanks to efforts to improve strategies to care for postpartum hemorrhage and hypertension, and also we have investment in training and preparing human resources in caring for the postpartum period. We've also been broadening our capacity and our methods for family planning through updating standards, including new methods, including the anti-contraceptive pill, the emergency pill, and ensuring its involvement and endorsement through the Executive Decree of 2023. We also have been ensuring supply across the healthcare units in Honduras. So you see, we have been improving year on year to ensure that couples are protected and have access to family planning means. Then turning to vaccination, as we saw regionally, we saw significant drops since the pandemic, where we had vaccination coverage between 2022 and 2023 that then dropped in many departments in Honduras for 80% in these areas. However, for the first time, we are recovering this for most vaccines, and coverage is around 90% as at September 2025. In terms of supply of medicine, we saw changes of 40% between 2021 and 2022. However, we have now seen through an information system across departments and hospitals at national level, and we are managing to keep supply at above 85%. And we're also acquiring, through the public sector, healthcare technologies such as prostheses. Then in other areas of chronic illness, the country has been guaranteeing continuity of care for all those living with chronic renal illnesses. This similarly for cancer, where this was almost completely within the tertiary sector. The country has been investing over $30 million to improve our diagnostic capacity and teams for, as well as imagery equipment that have been rolled out across 10 different areas. We're also improving our methods stemming from the capital of the country. Then finally, those living with HIV/AIDS, we are providing antiretroviral treatment in over 98% of cases, and we're increasing the coverage of our services and the follow-up and treatment in caring for patients, as well as improving our diagnostic capacity, ensuring that there are 4 units nationally to be able to provide this care. Next, we will show the video of Ms. Mara Sanay Lopez, who's the director of the intersectoral area for the Ministry for Social Development in Honduras.
Buenos días, señor presidente, excelencias.
Madam Vice President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, on behalf of the Secretariat of Social Development, I'm addressing you to clearly reiterate the tireless commitment of the State of Honduras to a robust, inclusive, restorative system of social protection, restorative of historic inequalities. Thus, in 2022, we created the Ministry and Secretary of State for the Office of Social Development, SEDESOL, as the guiding institution for social policy. The aim of the institution is to draft, coordinate, and assess public policies to reduce poverty, protect people from vulnerability, and to ensure social, economic, cultural, and environmental rights. The results are tangible. According to the National Statistics Institute, national poverty fell by from 73.6% in 2021 to 62.9% in 2024, and extreme poverty fell from 53% to 40.1%. We should mention that these data have been verified and backed up by international organs. One of the pillars of this transformation has been the Solidarity Network. This is functional in over 2,000 mayoral constituencies and reaching 967,000 homes with direct cash transfers to the tune of over $144 million, whereas 1,637 rural funds have received seed capital to promote local productive entrepreneurship. We should also mention that Honduras has promoted the human right to adequate food through comprehensive food safety and nutritional programs. One of these is the School Food Program, which ensures coverage for over 1.2 million boys and girls, including indigenous and Afro-Honduran populations, with an investment of $39.4 million. In addition, with an investment of $178.8 million, we have granted 1.4 million agricultural recipients the technological grant. This promotes local farming production and makes food available. To combat age discrimination and to ensure full enjoyment of the human rights of older persons, we have implemented direct cash transfers to homes and created the Centenary Grant, through which over 313 older Hondurans who are 100 years old receive constant economic support with investment over $380,000. On disability, we have registered 26,907 individuals with a disability. We have granted 2,704 pieces of technical assistance, and we have ensured labour inclusion of 950 individuals. This is the result of the creation of 76 municipal disability units. To conclude, we should also highlight that from SEDESOL, we have adopted measures to ensure sustained gradual budget in social policy through fiscal impact analysis of each policy and with a strict link to the priorities of poverty reduction to the country strategy 2022-2026. All of this is a result of major public investment, the biggest public investment in the history of Honduras, to the tune of around $5,827 million. Thus, we reiterate our commitment to continue building an effective social justice system where security and social well-being are the main guiding thread of all institutional action. Thank you. Thank you. I give the floor to Ms. Karen Funes, the General Secretary of the Prosecutor General's Office. Thank you very much, Sir, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. A very good morning. The Prosecutor General's Office of the Republic of Honduras is the institution which constitutionally ensures legal representation of the state and particularly does so before the Inter-American human rights system. It also assists in preparation of reports to treaty bodies and special procedures of the United Nations system when these occur. Between 2022 and 2025, Honduras has appeared at 63 working meetings, public and private hearings before our regional system, in so doing upholding its commitment to the international human rights protection system. In October 2024, Honduras signed an agreement with the Inter-American Human Rights Commission to establish an interdisciplinary group of independent experts for international technical assistance with a human rights-based approach in investigating the intellectual authorship of the murder of the environmental defender Berta Cáceres and related crimes. In reference to the gradual compliance with guarantees of non-repetition ordered by the Inter-American Court, we are implementing a project to bolster the process of systematizing state data on violence against LGBTIQ+ persons. We're also strengthening administration of justice with a differentiated approach. Similarly, as part of this project, we have built a training course for 300 state officials. In terms of reparations for indigenous people and Afro-Hondurans, we have gradually been strengthening spaces for frank, direct dialogue with leaders in line with international standards in this area, as we have seen with the Miskito people and the Garifuna people of Honduras. During this presidential term, Honduras has officially complied with 18 reparation measures, and 6 are partly complied with. These are from Inter-American Court rulings. On the environment, through the Directorate General of the Environment, environmental crimes are prosecuted, complaints are received, and work is done to defend the cultural and environmental heritage of the state. When it comes to addressing environmental complaints and support in operations through the Interinstitutional Task Force to Combat Environmental Crime, between 2022 and 2025, there were 695 inspections conducted in the field. Around 35 reforestation projects have been conducted, and these are followed up on from the different regional offices. 54 training sessions have been meted out to the student population and to the general public, and between 2024 and October 2025, there have been 72 indictments. Indictments in 72 cases. The state is implementing the project Padre Andrés Tamayo to ensure technical, legal, and investigative strengthening of the institution. This has enabled the issuance of around 15 measures to recover space in protected areas that are being affected. Similarly, we have begun a technical cooperation project called Strengthening the Process of Addressing Environmental Complaints with a protection-based approach for environmental defenders in Honduras. We reiterate the state's commitment to this assessment, the treaty bodies, and to other United Nations special procedures. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you to all the presenters from the delegation so far. We will now continue with our interactive dialogue. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of South Africa.
Vice President, South Africa welcomes the distinguished delegation of Honduras to this UPR session. My delegation commends Honduras for its efforts to promote and protect human rights, including the work undertaken to draft the public policy for promoting and protecting the human rights of the sovereign people and rebuilding Honduras 2025 to 2035, together with a national plan which aims to promote measurable progress in this regard, underpinned by a human rights-based approach. We similarly welcome efforts to promote memory, truth, justice, reparation, and non-repetition, particularly through the National Institute for Historical Memory, which conducts research and raises awareness of significant national events and social and political struggles. South Africa wishes to respectfully recommend that Honduras consider the following: criminalize the forced recruitment of children and adolescents by gangs and strengthen programs for their protection and social reintegration. Increase sentences for femicide, making them commensurate with the gravity of the crime, criminalize marital rape, and expand the network of specialized shelters for women and girls who are victims of gender-based violence, and continue efforts to formulate a legislative framework and implement public policies to guarantee the exercise of the rights of persons with disabilities. South Africa wishes Honduras a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Spain.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Spain warmly welcomes the delegation of Honduras and thanks it for the presentation of the national report. We commend Honduras for the adoption of Legislative Decree 28/2024, which encompasses the law on shelters for women survivors of violence in Honduras and the comprehensive care protocol for victims, survivors of sexual violence. Spain recommends that Honduras, 1, ensure the autonomy and independence of electoral authorities with a view to ensuring this for the upcoming general elections on the 30th of November, and ensure that emergency measures do not restrict the exercise of political rights and that they be aligned with international standards. 2, adopt a comprehensive special law to combat violence against women, the law to prevent, sanction, and eradicate political violence against women, and the violet alert law, Ley de Alerta Morada. Strengthen the improved capacity building for investigation of the Public Prosecutor's Office to put an end to impunity and prosecute and punish perpetrators of attacks on human rights defenders. And 4, adopt necessary measures to ensure to comply with the jurisprudence of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, establishing a gender identity recognition procedure and moving towards adoption of the law on gender identity change. We wish Honduras every success in this review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Switzerland.
Merci.
Thank you. Madam Vice President, Switzerland welcomes the delegation of Honduras. We'd like to thank them for their presentation. Switzerland makes the following recommendations to Honduras. First, strengthen the fight against impunity and corruption by ensuring political non-interference into anti-corruption mechanisms and ensuring the independence of the judiciary, as well as ensuring the rapid implementation of the International Anti-Corruption Commission in consultation with civil society. Second, improve the functioning and ensure the necessary funding for the national mechanism for the protection of human rights defenders with a view to taking into account their specific needs. Third, lift the state of emergency and ensure there are rapid, impartial, independent, efficient investigations against violations of human rights that have taken place, especially excessive use of force by military police. Fourth, take measures to prevent and combat heightened levels of violence against women and girls, especially through the adoption of a comprehensive law on violence against women. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Thailand.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Thailand welcomes Honduras' progress in strengthening human rights institutions, including through increased funding for the Ministry of Human Rights and the Office of the National Commissioner for Human Rights. We welcome progress on the draft public policy and national action plan for promoting and protecting human rights. Thailand recommends that Honduras tighten its regulations on civilian possession of weapons and firearms, and put in place measures to protect the safety of its citizens, especially in the area of conflict. Continue promoting the implementation of the UN Guiding Principle on Business and Human Rights, and consider developing a national action plan on this matter. Guarantee access to quality education by investing in school infrastructure, supplies, and educational resources, particularly for poor children, Afro-Hondurans, and for people with disabilities, while preventing early entry into the labor market. Continue efforts to increase women's participation in political and public life, as well as in public and private sectors. We wish Honduras a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Togo.
Merci, Madame la Vice.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Togolese delegation thanks the delegation of Honduras for their report on the human rights situation in their country. Togo takes note of the actions taken by Honduras in this area, and especially commends the adoption in March 2023 of the law on internally displaced persons, as well as the strengthening of mechanisms to reduce poverty. My country welcomes cooperation from the part of Honduras with UN mechanisms on monitoring of the human rights situation in the country. Nevertheless, in a constructive spirit, Togo would like to propose the following recommendations. 1. Further strengthen the protection of indigenous and Afro-Honduran communities against all forms of discrimination in accordance with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Second, continue to combat poverty and ensure universal access to social security, education, and healthcare services. To conclude, Togo wishes Honduras a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Tunisia.
شكرا سيدة نائبة الرئيس.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. We welcome the delegation of Honduras, and we'd like to thank them for their national report in this cycle. We commend the cooperation of the government with the recommendations from the third cycle. This has enabled them to strengthen their legislative institutional framework for human rights. This was reflected in the establishment of a ministry to combat corruption, as well as other ministries, and the establishment of a system to protect human rights defenders, journalists, and justice officials. In a constructive manner, we would like to recommend, first of all, strengthen investments and provide water and sanitation access in rural and urban areas. Ensure there's a strategy to integrate children with disabilities into the system in accordance with the national law in this area. Third, strengthen efforts to ensure there is a strategy to provide for food security and combat malnutrition. Fourth, provide for participation in order to implement the national plan for the period up to 2027 with the participation of all concerned parties. Finally, we wish them every success. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Turkey.
Madam Vice President, we would like to welcome the delegation of Honduras and thank them for their presentation. We note with appreciation the measures taken to promote gender equality, protect women and children from violence, and expand access to education, health, and social protection programs. These efforts, together with strengthened cooperation with international and regional human rights mechanisms, demonstrate Honduras' renewed commitment to human rights and social inclusion. In a constructive spirit, we recommend Honduras to continue strengthening its national framework for the protection of women and children, including through effective implementation of the new laws, institutions, and public policies aimed at ensuring equality, access to justice, and the enjoyment of human rights by all. We wish Honduras all success during its fourth UPR. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ukraine.
Madam Vice President, Ukraine welcomes the delegation of Honduras and thanks it for the presentation of its national report. We acknowledge the steps taken by Honduras to improve the human rights situation, including strengthening the role of national human rights institutions. At the same time, we remain concerned about continuing human rights challenges and emphasize the importance of ensuring protection, equality, and accountability for all. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, Ukraine would like to recommend that Honduras ensure the full protection of human rights defenders, journalists, and representatives of civil society, guaranteeing that they can work freely and safely, strengthen the rule of law, transparency, and accountability across state institutions, continue efforts to combat violence against women, and promote equality and inclusion for all. Improve access to quality health care and education, especially for vulnerable and rural communities. We wish Honduras every success in its review and in fulfill its commitments to human rights protection. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The United Kingdom welcomes Honduras' decision to lift the 14-year ban on the use and sale of the emergency contraceptive pill, a significant step for the rights of women and girls. However, we remain concerned by the sustained levels of gender-based violence. We also note with concern the challenges faced by indigenous and Afro-descendant communities in exercising their right to resolving land tenure conflicts, including criminalization, threats, and violence. The murder of Juan Lopez highlights the urgent need for stronger protections. As Honduras approaches its elections, we are concerned journalists and civil society. These risks are compounded by the limited resources of the National Protection Mechanism. We recommend that Honduras prioritizes the approval of the comprehensive special law on violence against women, protects indigenous peoples and human rights defenders who work on environmental issues through legal reforms and effective enforcement, including safeguarding the right to free, prior, and informed consent, And lastly, we recommend that Honduras strengthens its national protection mechanism through allocating sufficient resources and implementing agile procedures that enable swift delivery of protection measures tailored to those risks. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uruguay.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Uruguay welcomes the delegation of Honduras and thanks it for the presentation of its report. We would hail efforts made by the country to implement the recommendations from the third cycle of the UPR. In a constructive spirit, we recommend that Honduras, 1, adopt a bioethic framework to guarantee the ethical principles of medical and scientific practices. 2, ratify the optional protocol to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and consider acceding to the Convention on Violence and Harassment of the ILO number 190 from 2019. 3, ensure access to sexual and reproductive healthcare services and develop a comprehensive national strategy that is multisectoral to prevent teenage pregnancy and that ensures interinstitutional coordination and sustained implementation. 4, adopt the necessary measures to combat impunity for cases of femicide and crimes against LGBTIQ+ persons, journalists and defenders, and ensure that investigations into human rights violations are conducted rapidly, effectively, impartially and extensively, guaranteeing effective access to justice. Uruguay wishes Honduras every success at this 4th UPR cycle. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Vanuatu.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Vanuatu welcomes the delegation of Honduras and thanks the delegation for the presentation of its national report. We recognize Honduras' efforts to integrate human rights and sustainable development objectives, including efforts to strengthen environmental governance and disaster risk management through its national development plans and policies benefiting women, children, indigenous people, and persons with disabilities. Vanuatu encourages Honduras authorities to continue their efforts and would like, in constructive dialogue, to make the following recommendations. 1, integrate human rights into national climate policies and adaptations plans, ensuring the meaningful participations of affected communities, especially indigenous peoples, women and youth. And 2, strengthen institutional and legal frameworks for climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction, including early warning systems and climate resilient infrastructure. Vanuatu wishes the delegation of Honduras a successful UPR. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Vietnam.
Madam Vice President, Vietnam warmly welcomes the delegation of Honduras and appreciates the presentation of its national report. We commend Honduras' efforts to strengthen the rule of law and democracy, advance social protection policies, expand access to public services, and to promote institutional transformation in recent years. In a spirit of constructive dialogue, we now offer the following 2 recommendations. First, to continue its efforts to intensify climate change adaptation and environmental resilience measures, including through expanding reforestation and rural climate resilient agriculture. Second, further expand inclusive social protection schemes and targeted poverty reduction initiatives to ensure sustainable access to essential services, particularly health, education, and clean water for children, women, and other vulnerable populations. We wish Honduras continued success in its UPR process. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Armenia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Armenia welcomes the distinguished delegation of Honduras to the 4th cycle and thanks for highlighting its achievements in the field of human rights. We recognize steps taken by Honduras to strengthen its efforts to improve institutional capacity and expand social inclusion. Armenia also positively notes Honduras' commitment to embrace its environmental and climate change regulatory framework and recommends to strengthen its efforts to address issues on biodiversity conservation and promote environmental protection. Based on principle of constructive dialogue, Armenia additionally recommends 1, to further increase cooperation with the UN human rights mechanism, and 2, enhance access to justice and judicial independence with particular attention to vulnerable groups and rural communities. We wish Honduras continued success in its efforts to promote and protect human rights. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to distinguished representative of Australia.
Thank you, Vice President. We thank the delegation for their presentation. Australia welcomes the adoption of the 2021 electoral law to strengthen democratic governance in Honduras. Australia is concerned by the continuing violence against LGBTQIA+ persons and high rates of gender-based violence, including femicide and offender impunity. Australia recommends Honduras: 1. Ensure transparent and fair elections with oversight from impartial and credible institutions by continuing reform of electoral institutions and processes. 2. Recognize Indigenous and rural media outlets and repeal laws that criminalize journalists and human rights and environmental defenders. And 3. Strengthen responses to gender-based violence through stronger implementation and funding for gender-based violence shelters and government services. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Austria.
Thank you. Austria welcomes the delegation of Honduras and thanks for the presentation. We commend the efforts undertaken since the last review. We welcome the adoption of the law on shelters for women, survivors of violence, and the establishment of the National Coordination of Indigenous and Afro-Honduran People. Austria remains deeply worried over high levels of violence against women. Also, the dangers faced by journalists and human rights defenders highlights the need to strengthen the national protection mechanism. We are concerned about discrimination against Indigenous persons and Afro-Hondurans who face high-risk conflicts related to land concessions. We are disappointed that necessary legislation to implement the International Commission Against Corruption and Impunity has not yet been adopted. Austria offers the following recommendations. 1. Consider revising legal definitions of offences that are used to criminalise human rights defenders and other civil society actors for exercising the right of freedom of expression. 2. Strengthen the national protection mechanism by allocating sufficient funds, ensuring effective implementation procedures, as well as prompt, effective and impartial investigation of crimes against defenders, journalists and media workers. 3. Ensure recognition of ancestral lands and territories of Indigenous and Afro-Honduran people and adopt a framework for free, prior and informed consultations and consent for mega projects concerning these territories. And 4. Ratify the optional protocol to CEDAW and prioritize adoption of the comprehensive special law on violence against women. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bahamas.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Bahamas warmly welcomes the delegation of Honduras, thanks it for its report, and commends the country for its constructive engagement in the UPR. We positively note strides made by Honduras since the last reporting period, including the adoption of the National Policy for the Prevention of Violence Against Women, the strengthening of social protection programs, and efforts to enhance the independence of the judiciary and promote transparency. With a view to encouraging further progress, the Bahamas respectfully recommends that Honduras: 1. Ensure full and effective implementation of the National Policy for the Prevention of Violence Against Women, including through adequate funding and coordination across institutions. 2. Expand access to quality education and health services, particularly for rural, Indigenous, and Afro-descendant communities, including by improving local infrastructure, increasing deployment of teachers and health workers, and strengthening maternal health programs. And 3. Strengthen labor inspection and protection mechanisms to safeguard workers, including women and young people, from exploitation and unsafe conditions. We wish Honduras every success in this UPR process. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bangladesh.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Bangladesh welcomes a distinguished delegation of Honduras. We take note of the efforts Honduras has made to strengthen its human rights institution, including the ongoing work on drafting the public policy for promoting and protecting human rights of the sovereign people and the rebuilding Honduras, and the National Action Plan aimed at protecting and promoting the human rights of its people. We also welcome Honduras' continuous engagement with the UN Human Rights Mechanism. In a spirit of constructive cooperation, Bangladesh recommends the following to Honduras. 1. Continue its efforts to promote participation of women in economic, political, and public sphere. 2. Strengthen initiative to increase impartiality and independence of the judiciary. 3. Step up its efforts to ensure full inclusion and equal and meaningful participation of persons with disability, including through formulation of legislative framework. 4. Continue its efforts to prevent and combat trafficking in persons and protect victims of trafficking. We wish Honduras a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Belgium.
Madam Vice President, Belgium welcomes the delegation of Honduras and its effort to address child protection and public security while remaining concerned about the persistent violence against children. In a constructive spirit, Belgium therefore recommends the government of Honduras to step up efforts to combat child labor by enforcing labor laws, strengthening labor inspections, imposing appropriate penalties, and providing remedies for victims. Accelerate the implementation of the national plan in response to violence against children and adolescents, allocating sufficient resources for its effective implementation. While recognizing that exceptional measures may be required in response to serious security challenges, Belgium is concerned about the potential impact of prolonged or broadly framed states of emergency on human rights. Therefore, Belgium recommends Honduras to reassess the measures introduced by the state of emergency and for investigations to be carried out into the violence and human rights violation perpetrated in this context. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of plurinational state of Bolivia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. We warmly welcome the distinguished delegation of Honduras, headed by the Secretary of State for Human Rights. We welcome the presentation of the national report and the constructive involvement with the UPR process. We hail progress made since the last review, including the drafting of the National Action Plan and the public policy to promote and protect human rights 2025-2035. We would also highlight the cooperation with regional human rights mechanisms. In a constructive spirit, Bolivia recommends the following. 1. Move forward with the adoption and gradual implementation of a law focusing on building an equitable fiscal system that is transparent and focused on strengthening the fiscal space and the promotion of financial sustainability of the state. 2. Strengthen measures seeking to ensure the right to a safe, healthy, clean environment, including through continuity of the Zero Forestation Plan. 3. Continue with efforts aimed to combat corruption and impunity. Bolivia wishes the Sister Republic of Honduras every success in this UPR. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Brazil warmly welcomes Honduras. We commend Honduras for having granted over 9,000 hectares, titles to over 9,000 hectares of land to Mesquita and Garifuna communities. This is a necessary step to ensure full legal recognition of indigenous peoples' territories and territories of Afro-Hondurans. We also held the effective implementation of the decree authorizing the use of the emergency contraceptive pill, freely available in the public healthcare network. In a constructive spirit, Brazil recommends to Honduras that it, 1, adopt measures to ensure effective protection for human rights defenders, in particular through protocols for investigation of crimes committed against them. 2, amend the legal framework and policies aimed at combating discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity to bring it into line with international human rights standards, also ensuring full guarantee of civil rights for same-sex couples. We wish Honduras every success in the UPR. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cameroon.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Cameroon welcomes the high-level delegation of Honduras. We'd like to thank them for presenting their report. Our delegation applauds the active participation of Honduras in improvement of the human rights situation, and we commend them on the creation of a committee for the recommendations that have come from the last UPR cycle. In a constructive spirit, my delegation would like to present the following recommendations to the distinguished delegation from Honduras. First, adopt legislative and regulatory measures in order to ensure the right to mental health. Second, continue efforts to ensure access to education for all, especially through improving school infrastructure in rural zones. Third, improve accessibility and availability of healthcare services of high quality, in particular in rural and remote areas, and for disenfranchised groups. To conclude, Cameroon reiterates its support to Honduras and wishes them every success in their UPR. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Canada.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Canada thanks Honduras for its participation in the Universal Periodic Review. We welcome the positive steps taken by Honduras toward eliminating violence against women and girls, supporting survivors of intimate partner violence, promoting safe and dignified human mobility, and the reintegration of returnees. Canada recommends that Honduras, 1, fully implement the National Protection Mechanism by establishing robust accountability measures for state authorities who fail to provide adequate protection to human rights defenders, including Indigenous rights defenders, environmental rights defenders, and journalists. 2, strengthen enforcement of Article 118A of the Penal Code, which defines and penalizes femicide by improving prevention, investigation, and prosecution of gender-based violence. 3, enhance the independence and integrity of the justice system by establishing a transparent judicial appointment process in line with the UN Basic Principles on the Independence of the Judiciary. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Chile.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. We commend the Republic of Honduras for progress made in strengthening institutions, human rights institutions, particularly at the creation of the National Coordinatorship for Indigenous Peoples and Afro-Hondurans in 2022. In a constructive spirit, Chile respectfully recommends that Honduras, 1, ratify the Escazú Agreement, 2, decriminalize abortion for causes linked to sexual violation, fetal inviolability, and grave danger of the life of the pregnant mother. 3, adopt a normative framework to guarantee effective enjoyment of the rights of LGBTIQ+ persons by removing provisions that afford discriminatory treatment to them before the law. 4, adopt the necessary measures to strengthen independence of the judiciary, ensuring the adoption of a normative framework that is in line with international standards and the protection of judges and prosecutors from reprisals. 5, bolster human rights training for judges, prosecutors, and other justice operators. We wish the Republic of Honduras every success in this UPR cycle. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of China.
China welcomes Honduras' constructive engagement in this UPR cycle. We have carefully studied this national report and commend its active implementation of the recommendations from the previous cycle, as well as notable progress in strengthening institutional framework, promoting socio-economic development, safeguarding the rights of vulnerable groups such as women, persons with disability, and migrants. China wishes to offer 2 recommendations. First, continue to advance poverty alleviation to effectively reduce the number of poor people and safeguard the right to development. And second, continue to provide necessary support to returning diaspora to facilitate their reintegration into society and contribution to national development. China stands ready to help Honduras within its ability with livelihoods improvement and capacity building. China wishes to offer one question: what measures have been taken to ensure adequate and sustainable budget allocations for social policies aimed at reducing poverty and inequality? Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Colombia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Colombia welcomes the distinguished delegation of Honduras to the fourth cycle of the Universal Periodic Review. In a constructive spirit, we recommend that Honduras, 1, strengthen the process for the election and appointment of the National Human Rights Commissioner and ensure that that institution has the sufficient resources to implement the mandate in line with the Paris Principles. 2, make progress with the necessary measures, including constitutional and legal reforms, to guarantee access to safe, legal, free abortion services in the case of rape, incest, risk for the life or health of the mother, or grave and mortal fetal anomaly. 3, resume the process of building the National Action Plan for Business and Human Rights with the participation of various sectors of civil society, private companies, and the national government. 4, strengthen the response capacity to climate change by increasing the material and human resources and adopting specific measures to protect coastal communities and densely populated areas from sea level rise, floods, and other slowly evolving phenomena. Thank you very much, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Costa Rica.
Gracias.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Costa Rica thanks the delegation of Honduras for the presentation of the report and welcomes the fact that the 1st of August annually has been declared as Day of the Black Afro-descendant population, English-speaking population in Honduras, and offers the following recommendations. 1, strengthen the protection for human rights defenders, journalists, and justice operators, punish attacks against them, and prevent undue use of criminal provisions to criminalize their work. 2, criminalize enforced disappearance as a standalone crime so that it can be investigated and punished in any context and not just as a crime against humanity. 3, revise and update legislation on climate change and allocate the necessary resources to make this effective, as well as taking into account the specific needs of rural and coastal communities affected by environmental degradation. 4, strengthen land title mechanisms and legal certainty in land tenure and regulate the right to free, prior, informed consent of indigenous and Afro-descendant peoples. 5, guarantee rapid establishment of breastfeeding rooms in all public institutions and promote their adoption in the private sector as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cuba.
Gracias, señora vicepresidenta.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. We warmly welcome the delegation of the Sister Republic of Honduras, headed by the Secretary of State for Human Rights, and we hail efforts made by the country to strengthen democratic institutions and to move towards the promotion and protection of human rights. We hail the commitment to gender equality, which is reflected in the creation of the Secretariat of Women, as well as strengthening of the program of city women, the adoption of laws for shelters and comprehensive care for women victims of violence, as well as implementation of gender-based budgets. We recognize progress in health, education, social protection with the broadening and expansion of hospital and educational infrastructure. We recommend the following. 1, continue to refurbish recreational and sporting spaces for children and young people, ensuring their free, safe, and access to them as part of a national policy aimed at ensuring comprehensive well-being, social inclusion, and violence prevention. 2, redouble measures to ensure land title and certainty, focusing on rural areas and respect for the rights of indigenous people and persons of African descent. 3, broaden and strengthen social protection programs and economic support programs targeting families in poverty and vulnerability. We wish the Republic of Honduras every success at this review and in the process of implementing the accepted recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cyprus.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Cyprus welcomes the delegation of Honduras and thanks it for its presentation today. We commend the progress achieved since the previous review cycle, notably efforts to promote and protect the intangible cultural heritage of people of African descent, the removal of restrictions on access to emergency contraception, and the enactment of legislation establishing shelter homes for victims of gender-based violence. Nonetheless, we remain gravely concerned about the continued high prevalence of violence against women and girls, in particular femicides. Cyprus recommends the following. 1. Ratify the OP to the Convention on the Rights of the Child on a Communications Procedure. 2. Take urgent and comprehensive measures to prevent, investigate, and prosecute femicides. 3. Take further measures to ensure effective protection and assistance from human rights defenders, including by involving civil society in the development of prevention and protection measures. And 4. Scale up education and employment opportunities for young people, especially those living in rural areas. We wish Honduras a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Czechia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Czechia welcomes the delegation of Honduras and thanks for the presentation of its national report. We take note of the efforts to strengthen measures for prevention of sexual and gender-based violence and encourage Honduras to continue with further steps. In order to effectively promote and protect human rights, Czechia wishes to provide following recommendations to Honduras. 1. Decriminalize abortion and advance the protection of women's rights and combat discrimination, while strengthening measures to prevent and address sexual and gender-based violence, including femicide. 2. Conduct prompt and effective investigations into killings and other crimes targeting LGBTQI+ persons and prosecute those responsible. 3. Allocate sufficient resources to protect journalists and human rights defenders, including environmental rights defenders, guarantee their rights to freedom of opinions and expression and freedom of peaceful assembly and association, and secure that the justice system upholds their ability to operate freely and without undue interference. And 4, take measures to safeguard judicial independence by introducing transparent career systems and fair disciplinary procedures that are free from political interference. We wish Honduras a successful UPR. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the delegation to address observations and comments that have been raised so far. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. I give the floor to Ms. Silvia Valles Ayala Igroa from the National Congress. Thank you, Secretary of State, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. Over the past 4 years, the National Congress has driven through structural reforms to rebuild democratic institutions, strengthen the rule of law, and consolidate a legal framework that places the human being at the heart of legislation. With a view to moving towards equality and gender equality and justice, we would highlight the following: the Act for Protecting Women in the Context of Humanitarian Crisis, the Act on the Nominations Committee for the Supreme Court of Justice, establishing a minimum quota for the selection of magistrates and judges. In consequence, we established a court that shows parity with 8 judges and 8 female judges and 7 male. This is a historic moment towards gender equality. There's also the law on decrees that guarantees transparency and accountability and access to public information for citizens. We have brought about reforms to dismantle the so-called impunity pact that restricted the state's capacity to investigate and punish acts of corruption. They would include the repealing of the decree to restore criminal public action in the case of mishandling of public funds, as well as the repeal of the decree for restoring the key function of confiscating goods in investigations that are connected to corruption and asset laundering. We also have strengthened the role of the High Court of Auditors and eradicated obstacles that impeded any timely referral of cases to the Public Prosecution Service. We should also highlight that a number of normative instruments have been passed in terms of human rights. We would include the reform for the responsibility of the National Police and the appropriate elaboration
and keeping up to date the manual on the number on prisoners, guaranteeing the veracity of information respecting human rights of the detainees. There's the repeal of the Act on Employment per Hour, this to uphold the right to decent work, the Act on Prevention, Care and Protection of IDPs, which guarantees comprehensive protection to those who have been compelled to leave their homes, the reform on the Act for Protecting the Honduran Migrant with a view to increasing the Solidarity Fund for the Honduran migrants from $5 million to $12 million currently, the Act on Inclusive Employment that establishes a 5% quota for the 9 indigenous and Afro-descendant communities of the country. This applies to the public sector and to major companies. There's also a favourable opinion on a draft law for searching and legal protection for the disappeared members of the family. This is going to be discussed in plenary. In terms of the questions that have been sent in advance on the elimination of discrimination against women and for reasons of age, as well as the right to a healthy environment, we would provide the following information. In addition to the Act on Equal Opportunities for Women, there are provisions in the Electoral Act and the Criminal Code that prohibit discrimination against women in step with constitutional provisions that guarantee the right to equality. A reform took place on the Labour Inspection Act to avoid any discrimination on the basis of age for those over 35. There was also a reform to the Comprehensive Act on Protecting Older Persons and Retired Persons to grant greater economic benefits and discounts to those who are over 80. We passed reforms on forests, protected areas and wildlife, strengthening the institutionality of these assets. We reformed the criminal code, incorporating criminal responsibility and legal personality for illegal exploitation and ecological damage. We broadened the limits for national parks and protected areas. We passed a decree that prohibits the parceling and building on forest areas that have been affected by fires, plagues or natural phenomena, and this for 50 years. Finally, we would highlight the passing of the Community Climate Awareness and Action Act, which promotes the participation of students, civil society, state and the private sector in restoring, protecting our ecosystem. Thank you. I will now give the floor to Mr. Roberto Ramos Bustos, Ambassador and Advisor to the Secretary of State. Vice President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. First, I'd like to express our sincere thanks to the delegations for their advanced questions and for their recently given recommendations, and this just serves to enrich our dialogue during this UPR. To this end, Honduras has ratified 9 of the main human rights treaties within the United Nations. It has recognized the competence of 4 committees to receive individual communications and 2 to receive interstate communications. We are looking at adopting the 2 optional protocols and other ILO conventions. Given the foregoing, and as has been said, we hold an open invitation to special procedures within the human rights system. And between 2022 and 2025, we received 6 country visits, as well as the on-site visit of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights and its Subcommittee for Prevention of Torture. Between 2023 and 2025, we successfully concluded the periodic review with 6 treaty bodies. Honduras reiterates its firm commitment to combat corruption and impunity. We firmly believe that transparency and accountability are pillars for democracy. To this end, we signed a memorandum of understanding with the Secretary General of the United Nations to set up an international commission against corruption and impunity. We are also promoting discussions on the Kamala Amendment to the Rome Statute of 1998 on the crime of aggression, reflecting Honduras' commitment to international criminal justice. Madam Vice President, on migration, Honduras is implementing a human rights-based approach to its policy. In August of 2024, we established the Council for Migration Governance, tasked with coordinating and advising on national migration policy. Subsequently, in 2025, we passed the National Emergency Strategy to protect Honduran migrants, and this led to the program Brother, Sister, Come Home, which provided care to returnee migrants through seed capital, access to funding, and community projects. More than 980,000 migrants in transit benefited directly. As part of the bilateral and regional cooperation, Honduras has set up a bi-national protocol for protection and care for children and adolescents. And in the last couple of years, we have set up 7 such consulates or mobile units that have helped 33,000 Hondurans in accessing consular assistance. Finally, we would reaffirm Honduras' commitment to the universal human rights system and the spirit of this constructive spirit and the spirit of dialogue that characterizes the Universal Periodic Review. As such, we would like to thank states for their recommendations, and we reiterate our readiness to continue to work openly and in the spirit of cooperation for a fairer, more inclusive country respectful of human dignity. I thank you. I now give the floor to Mr. Erwin Engardo Cruz Mendoza, Head of the Department of Human Rights of the Ministry of Security. Thank you, Secretary of State, and good day to you, Excellencies, delegates. Honduras has seen a significant drop in violence. The homicide rate dropped 41.7 points per 100,000 inhabitants and to approximately 27 per 100,000 in 2024, which is the lowest figure in the past 20 years. And this is projected to be 21 points for 2025. These improvements are a result of a citizen-based strategy that includes operations against crime and also comprehensive programs for prevention and community participation. In December 2022, we launched the National Security Plan, Solutions to Crime. The National Police broadened coverage, creating 7 regional units and 23 new metropolitan units for prevention, ensuring police presence in communities where it had been lacking. We created 5 specialized directorates, including the Anti-Gang and Gangs Against Organized Crime Police Directorate and the Patrol Unit for the Streets. Also ensured coverage. We increased the number of women in police ranks from 12 to 30%, and we have operations that are focusing on human rights and gender. We recognize that violence against women and girls is a scourge that requires specialized response. In 2024, the National Police created the Immediate Response Unit for Gender Violence, ensuring 8 regional units exclusively dedicated to dealing with cases of violence on the basis of gender. We also implemented a comprehensive anti-extortion plan, which includes protection for victims and witnesses, safe hotlines or ways of lodging complaints, and ensuring transport. The Ministry for Security, through the Directorate for Disciplinary Affairs with Police, is rigorously investigating professional faults, and alleged violations of human rights committed by members of the police. This ensures accountability, and when necessary, exemplary penalty is handed down, reaffirming the state's commitment to transparency and legality and respect for human rights. In addition, Honduras has included training in human rights and proportional use of force as a core part of police training. During 2024, mandatory training was provided to all police agents on respect and due process and international human rights standards. We also established updated protocols on police behavior and action and internal oversight mechanisms to prevent abuse. Emergency security measures can be justified when necessary, when they need to be proportional. and appropriate to tackle violence and applied only when there's no alternative and in a temporary and focused manner. Furthermore, there should be human rights oversight based on international standards, thus striving to strike a balance between protecting public order and respecting fundamental human rights. Thank you. I recognize Eduardo Alberto Alemán Martinez, Director of the Gender Equality Unit in the Ministry of Defense. Thank you, Secretary of State. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it's an honor to address you on behalf of the Ministry for National Defense, which has bolstered its organizational structure. We now have a Directorate for Human Rights and Gender Equality at a central level, in addition to the humanitarian unit for the General Staff of the Armed Forces, and this within each unit of the Armed Forces, the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, military, police, and public order. Each one of these departments has 4 dedicated units, one in human rights, one in international humanitarian law, the use of force, and gender equality, thus ensuring that this has reached each battalion. Furthermore, school curriculum include training on these areas within military education centres. This has had a measurable impact. Since 2022, participation in training in human rights has increased 4-fold compared to 2021, and currently almost we've seen a 5-fold increase, going from 9,500 to 50,000 participations annually in 2024 and 2025. And these special training days are given in collaboration with UN organizations. Another innovation has been the implementation of a project on human rights, international humanitarian law, and the use of force, which recreates practical scenarios or role plays for decision-making for military units. And Honduras is the second country in the world to apply this methodology, and this has been replicated within the Military Training Center of the Armed Forces since 2024. We're also making progress in demilitarizing the penitentiary system and public security structures, strengthening civilian aspects. We have dissolved the FUSINA, the National Security Force, and the National Security Transport Force, and moved to creating the Anti-Gang and Anti-Gangs Against Organized Crime Brigade. Between 2023 and 2024, we saw 2,760 penitentiary agents graduating from civilian training, and 58 officials that have university qualifications. And they are now taking on management roles within the penitentiary system. We also created the 3R program, Rehabilitation, Re-education and Reintegration, which tries to break the cycles of criminality and reoffending and offering education, employment opportunities and mental health care to persons deprived of their liberty. This is a 2-year program which prioritizes those who are close to obtaining release. We also, in addition to the reduction of complaints with CONADE, we see a drop in the number of complaints on human rights violations that are being committed by armed forces of Honduras. From this government in 2022, we have seen a 40% average reduction in connection to the complaints that have been lodged, which had a number of spikes of over 200 complaints in 2017-2018. In this government, we've managed to achieve figures lower than 100 complaints per year, and this shows a positive trend within the military schools. Thank you very much. Next, I give the floor to Ms. Carmen Azelia Espinosa Carrasco, the Executive Director of the National Institute for Caring for Juvenile Offenders. Thank you, Secretary of State, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. To give effect to the recommendations given to the State of Honduras, where it was encouraged to harmonize its juvenile criminal justice system with the Convention and other relative standards, we would mention the following steps that have been taken. deprivation of liberty as a matter of last resort. Statistics show that since 2021, we have seen a drop of 54%. The significant reduction complies with or has occurred because of awareness raising and specialized training for justice operators. To date, we have conducted 35 training processes to approximately 233 justice officials. 100% of adolescents and young people are signed up to the education system. In 2023, we created the official institution called Manuel Castillo-Giron. We also guarantee the right to health 24/7, including providing the provision of 12 doctors and 16 nurses within these institutions. To reduce the risks for adolescents, we are ensuring measures such as separation by age group and psychological care. There have been about 24 interinstitutional inspections in collaboration with the National Commission for Human Rights, the Special Prosecutor for Children, and the NPM, thus controlling rational use of force according to the principles of proportionality. It's also important to mention that the security system in each of these pedagogical centres is controlled by civilians who have been trained within the institute. Looking at the budget for the institution, this went from 690,000 in 2022 to almost 10 million in 2025. For greater care, we created and passed models for care and managing penalty within the interinstitutional system for adolescents in Honduras. In 2025, we created complaints mechanisms through setting up complaints or suggestion boxes, and we had 147 suggestions with opinions, complaints, and suggestions from adolescents. A number of processes have been implemented with civil society organizations, decision makers, and the judiciary to cater to the recommendation regarding the age of criminal responsibility. To tackle one of the most sensitive issues in connection with adolescents that are involved in gangs, Article 219 of the new criminal code has defined as a crime the use of adolescents as a type of trafficking. Along these same lines, we created the program to dismantle or disconnect adolescents from gangs and the program for social reintegration. We're mindful that the institution is geared at bringing about rehabilitation, and we've set up a plan to open a new centre that can make this possible. We have a maximum security centre, New Halteba, but it is going to be closed because it no longer complies with the minimum standards for rehabilitation. Thank you. Next, Ms. Andrea Cruz Rodriguez, Director from within the Ministry for Women. Secretary of State, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. Allow me to begin by saying that after 200 years of governments that have been led by men, we have democratically elected the first woman to the presidency, Iris Xiomara Castro Sarmiento. Against this backdrop, we created the Ministry for Women in April 2024, and the budget has been increased by 154% to date as a measure to accelerate the streamlining of gender perspectives in all of the public sector. We include in the provisions for general budget of the Republic the obligation to ensure that public institutions earmark a minimum of 10% of their resources to conduct actions to promote justice and gender equality. We are, on an annual basis, ensuring that we adhere to the rate or the index for investing in gender equality. This mechanism has made it possible for us to identify 112 institutions, and 45 have gender-sensitive budgets. To monitor the success of these initiatives, for the first time, we had 3 public hearings in 2022, 2023, and 2025 in coordination with the legislature, and we saw the participation of women's organizations and international cooperation.
We have set up 130 municipal roundtables and a gender-sensitive budget on the basis of 298 municipal areas, representing a progress of 40%. We've seen an investment of $3 million for building and equipping the first public shelter houses and strengthening those that are already in existence. In the coming months, we will have some shelters in 3 of the departments with the highest violence rates. In this context, we see political will. And in 2024, we passed the Act on Shelters, which was a knock-on effect of setting up the Special Commission for Shelters in 2025. We are also pleased to say that the rule for protection of women in the context of humanitarian crises, natural disasters and emergencies passed in 2023 is currently in the final stages. To guarantee sexual and reproductive rights, we decriminalized the free access, sale and use of the emergency contraceptive pill. We broadened the coverage for family planning, and currently 1,280,672 partners or couples can access and use family planning methods. We've seen a reduction in teenage pregnancies by 20.1% in 3 years, and between 2022 and 2024, a drop in maternal mortality of 10% on girls and adolescents of 10 to 19 years old. We've also created 17 breastfeeding rooms and 5 centers for caring for children in public sector institutions to promote breastfeeding whilst working. To promote economic empowerment of women, we've established 15,615 property titles or land titles in the name of women, and 641,314 women have had access to productive projects through technological bonuses and so on, excellencies. In order to achieve what we have presented, we would like to reaffirm our commitment as a state to continue to progressively transform structures that perpetuate inequality and violence against women. Thank you very much.
We are going back with you, Mrs. Vice President.
Thank you. We will continue with the interactive dialogue. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Djibouti.
Merci, Madame la Vice-Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Djibouti welcomes the delegation of Honduras, and we'd like to thank them for presenting their national report. Djibouti commends the efforts taken by Honduras to implement the recommendations that have stemmed from the previous UPR. This is reflected in particular through the strengthening of public policy and the adoption of the public policy for promotion and protection of human rights of sovereign people and rebuilding the nation for 2025, and the action plan, as well as the institutional strategic plan for 2023-2027, and strengthening of the judiciary. We'd like to present the following recommendations. First, strengthen institutional mechanisms for prevention and combating violence against women, with a view to ensuring efficient protection for victims, ensuring access to justice, recovery, and appropriate support. Second, adopt and implement concrete measures that are also efficient to eliminate all forms of discrimination, in particular racism and racial discrimination against Indigenous peoples and the Afro-Honduran population. Continue and strengthen efforts to improve the right for education for all by guaranteeing equitable access without discrimination for high-quality education, especially for Indigenous peoples and Afro-Honduran community. Thank you very much, and we wish you every success in your review.
I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Dominica.
President, Dominica extends a warm welcome to the delegation of Honduras and thanks the country for its comprehensive national report. We commend Honduras for the establishment of the Ministry of Women's Affairs in 2022 and the revival of the Interagency Commission for monitoring the investigation of violent deaths of women and femicides as part of a series of considered efforts to strengthen protections for women. In a constructive spirit, Dominica recommends that Honduras, 1, further strengthen efforts to promote the economic empowerment of indigenous and Afro-descendant peoples through skills development and sustainable livelihood initiatives. 2, continue to strengthen the infrastructure and services of health centers across the country, prioritizing rural areas, indigenous and Afro-descendant communities, and populations in remote areas to ensure equitable, accessible, and high-quality healthcare for all. We wish the delegation of Honduras every success during the UPR process. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Dominican Republic.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Dominican Republic welcomes the distinguished delegation of the Republic of Honduras and commends them for the rigorous presentation of their national reports. We value the progress made in strengthening their democratic institutions, in promoting transparency, and in implementing public policies that are focused on people. We recognize efforts to bolster education at the pre-primary and secondary level, broadening coverage and improving educational infrastructure, particularly focusing on rural children, indigenous children, and children of African descent. We also value the policies geared at gender equality, climate action, and social protection in order to ensure dignified and inclusive aging. In a constructive spirit, we recommend that 1, they continue to bolster democratic institutions and the rule of law, broadening guarantees for effective citizen participation. 2, that they strengthen gender equality policies and economic empowerment for women. 3, consolidate efforts to combat and prevent public-private corruption. Consolidate policies. 4, consolidate policies for climate action and environmental sustainability. And we wish Honduras the best of success in implementing these recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ecuador.
Gracias.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Ecuador extends a warm welcome to the Secretary of State for Human Rights, Ambassador Arias Ocada, and the rest of the delegation of Honduras, and thanks them for the presentation of their report. We'd highlight the creation in 2022 of the National Coordination for Afro-Honduran and Indigenous Peoples. In a constructive spirit, we recommend that 1, they continue stepping up efforts to prevent the sale and exploitation of children, in particular by organized gangs or maras, and particularly looking at the tourist sector. 2, that it increase penalty for femicide and that these be they be proportional to the seriousness of the crime, and to broaden the shelters for women. 3, that it guarantee respect for the right to freedom of expression and pluralism of the media, including citizen participation. And 4, that it continue actively participating in negotiating a legally binding instrument on business and human rights as part of the working group established by Resolution 269 of the Human Rights Council. Ecuador wishes Honduras success in this 4th review. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Egypt.
شكرا سيدة نائب الرئيس.
Thank you, Vice President. Egypt would like to welcome the delegation from Honduras. We listened with great interest to the delegation's presentation of their efforts to strengthen human rights. In this regard, we'd like to mention the establishment of a Ministry for Human Rights and national reports to human rights bodies. We commend their efforts to promote socioeconomic rights. In the framework of this constructive dialogue, we have the following recommendations. Continue the implementation of measures to combat human trafficking, including through a support fund for victims of human trafficking. 2nd, continue to strengthen national efforts in social protection with emphasis on women, children, and persons with disabilities. Thank you very much. We wish you every success in your work.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of El Salvador.
Gracias, señora. Thank you, Madam Vice President. We warmly welcome the delegation of Honduras and thank them for the presentation of their report. We acknowledge the efforts made by Honduras as part of strengthening their institutions and in consolidating social programs geared at the welfare and development of their population. We also highlight the drop in homicide rates and the implementation of security strategies geared at combating criminality. In a constructive spirit, El Salvador recommends that 1. Honduras continue to bolster measures to prevent violence and improve citizen security as part of the National Plan for Human Rights. 2. That it broaden social programs for protecting children and adolescents. 3. It deepen its efforts to reduce poverty and inequality through expanding policies for social inclusion and promoting decent work. Finally, we would like to wish Honduras a very successful UPR. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Equatorial Guinea.
Presidenta.
Madam Vice President, the delegation of Equatorial Guinea welcomes the distinguished delegation of Honduras and commends it for the report presented in this UPR. Our country recognizes and values the efforts taken by Honduras in promoting respect for human rights in various sectors of social life, including the free enrollment program to guarantee free access to pre-primary and secondary education. We recommend the following: that it strengthen the comprehensive system for guaranteeing rights to children and adolescents. 2, that it broaden policies for strengthening the national education system by building new public schools. I conclude my statement wishing success to the delegation of Honduras. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Eritrea.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. We warmly welcome the distinguished delegation of Honduras, headed by His Excellency, the Secretary of State for Human Rights. We welcome Honduras' commitment to advancing food security and environmental protection. We note the adoption of the state policy on the agri-food sector, which aims to transform agricultural production through diversification, innovation, and resilience to climate change. We commend the establishment of the National Center for Livestock Reproduction and Biotechnology, benefiting 50,000 producers, and a productive technology voucher program that has supported more than 328,000 farmers in improving grain production and fertilizer access. We further recognize initiatives such as the Water Security Project and the Dry Corridor, the Fisheries and Aquaculture Promotion Program, and the National Irrigated Agriculture Program, all of which strengthen rural livelihoods and sustainable water management. We also welcome efforts to enhance the legal framework for environmental protection, including the Community Climate Awareness and Action Act and the integration of environmental education into the national curriculum. We humbly recommend Honduras to continue strengthening climate resilience, supporting small producers, and ensuring inclusive participation of local communities in implementing these policies. We thank Honduras for its presentation and wish it every success in promoting the well-being and human rights of its people. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Estonia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Estonia welcomes the delegation of Honduras and thanks for the presentation of its report. We note positively the establishment of the Ministry of Women's Affairs in 2022 and encourage continued progress to address discrimination and violence against women, including through the adoption of comprehensive legislation prohibiting all forms of discrimination against women. We remain concerned by the prevalence of violence against children and emphasize the need for continued and comprehensive efforts to effectively prevent and address such abuses. Estonia recommends to Honduras to 1. Amend national legislation to explicitly prohibit and criminalize all forms of recruitment and use of children under the age of 18 by non-state armed groups in line with international standards. 2. Decriminalize abortion, at least in cases of rape, incest, risk to life of the mother, and severe fetal impairment, and ensure access to comprehensive sexual and reproductive health services for all women and girls. And 3. Strengthen protection for human rights defenders and journalists by fully implementing and improving the national protection mechanism and by adopting effective measures to prevent the misuse of criminal law against these actors. We wish Honduras a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of France.
Merci, Madame la Thank you, Madam Vice President. France has taken note of the efforts undertaken by Honduras to promote gender equality, including through sexual and reproductive health-related rights. France recommends a lifting of the prolonged state of emergency and reinstatement of suspended constitutional guarantees, ensuring independence of electoral authorities. Second, continue the efforts in legislative and budgetary matters with a view to putting an end to violence committed against women, as well as discrimination against women and girls. Third, ensure the good functioning and neutrality of the National Mechanism for Protection with a view to efficiently protecting journalists and human rights defenders. Fourth, intensify the fight against discrimination and violence against LGBT+ persons and strengthen protection and support for victims. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Gambia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Gambia welcomes the delegation of the Republic of Honduras and commends its continued cooperation with the UPR process. We note progress in strengthening human rights institutions and initiatives to promote inclusion, cultural diversity, and protection of its citizens. We also acknowledge efforts to address the root causes of migration and strengthen protection for internally displaced persons. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, the Gambia offers the following recommendations. 1. Continue to strengthen programs and projects on historical memory aimed at promoting truth, justice, reparation, and guarantees of non-repetition through research, archival preservation, civic and cultural education, and the creation of public memory spaces honoring victims of human rights violations. 2, consider ratifying the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of Their Families and the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances. 3, promote effective implementation of equality policies, ensuring inclusive consultation with Afro-Honduran and indigenous communities on matters that affect them. 4, strengthen implementation of laws and services to protect women and children, including expanding shelters and psychosocial support, improving investigation and prosecution of violence against women and girls, and preventing child labor exploitation. We wish the delegation of Honduras continued success in advancing its human rights and development commitments. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Georgia.
Thank you, Vice President. Georgia welcomes the delegation of Honduras and thanks them for the presentation of the national report. We positively assess steps aimed at eradicating discrimination and violence against women through the design and monitoring of relevant policies. My delegation also appreciates the progress made by Honduras with the adoption and implementation of the Act for the Prevention of Internal Displacement and the Protection and Care of Internally Displaced Persons. Herewith, Georgia would like to recommend to Honduras, first, to continue efforts to guarantee access to the right to education for all, including by allocating sufficient resources and improvements in school infrastructure, and second, further strengthen the implementation of programs aimed at providing comprehensive health care for women. We wish the delegation of Honduras a very successful UPR. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Germany.
Vice President, we welcome the delegation of Honduras and appreciate its engagement with the UPR. We particularly commend the establishment of the Ministry for Women and note with appreciation the reported reduction in femicides. However, Germany remains deeply concerned about ongoing corruption and impunity, limited independence of the judiciary, and widespread human rights violations committed under a state of emergency. The human rights situation of journalists, human rights defenders, and environmentalists remains alarming, with continuing attacks, intimidation, and killings. In addition, land conflicts between indigenous communities and private investors persist, and decisions of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights often remain unimplemented. Germany, therefore, in a constructive spirit, recommends to, first, ensure a safe and enabling environment for human rights defenders and journalists by effectively investigating and prosecuting attacks against them and by adequately funding the national protection system. Second, guarantee freedom of expression of the press, including through transparent, fair, and inclusive allocation of radio frequencies, taking into account the needs of community media. 3, prevent the misuse of criminal law against environmental land rights defenders and ensure the fulfillment of rights of property, adequate housing, non-discrimination, due process, and where applicable, free and prior informed consent. 4. Ratify the optional protocol to Convention of the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. We wish Honduras a very successful review. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ghana.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Ghana warmly welcomes the high-level delegation of Honduras to the 4th UPR cycle and thank them for their report. Ghana acknowledges the substantial progress made by Honduras in advancing human rights since the 2020 review. We particularly recognize Honduras' effort aimed at strengthening the judicial system, especially the implementation of reforms to ensure proper technical and legal management of investigations. Madam Vice President, in the spirit of constructive dialogue, we recommend the following to Honduras. 1. To ratify the optional protocol to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. 2. To strengthen effort to prevent the sale of children and their sexual exploitation, particularly by organized criminal groups. And 3. To redouble effort to develop a social security system that is adequate and accessible to all. Ghana wishes Honduras a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Guyana.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. We extend a warm welcome to the delegation of Honduras to Geneva and the 4th UPR cycle review. Thanks to the delegation for their comprehensive report, and we commend Honduras in drafting its public policy for promoting and protecting the human rights of the sovereign people and rebuilding Honduras 2025 to 2035. In the spirit of constructive engagement, Guyana proposes the following recommendations to the delegation. Complete the drafting of and enact the public policy for promoting and protecting the human rights of the sovereign people and rebuilding Honduras 2025-2035. Strengthen measures aimed at protecting the rights of the child. Introduce measures and legislation where possible to ensure the inclusivity of indigenous people and peoples of African descent in all areas of life, especially regarding their cultural rights. And adopt measures and legislation to address discrimination against minority groups. Guyana wishes the delegation of Honduras every success during this UPR process.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Haiti.
Merci, Madame la...
Thank you, Madam Vice President. My delegation commends the participation of Honduras in the 4th UPR. We hail their implementation of a policy for promotion and protection of human rights, which is reflected in particular through adequate budgetary allocations for human rights promotion entities, as well as the strengthening of their judiciary, with a view to ensuring expeditious dispensation of justice with independence, integrity, and impartiality. My delegation notes with satisfaction Honduras' continued efforts to ensure transparency, access to information, promotion and preservation of collective historical memory. My delegation wishes Honduras a successful review. Thank you very much, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Iceland.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Iceland welcomes the delegation of Honduras and its national report. In the spirit of constructive engagement, Iceland recommends the following. 1. Adopt a comprehensive law on sexual and gender-based violence and protocols to investigate violence against women, including femicide. 2. Amend the criminal code to criminalize marital rape. 3. Ensure assistance and remedies for victims of gender-based violence. 4. Legalize abortions in all circumstances. 5. Ensure access to comprehensive sexual and reproductive health services. 6. Decriminalize same-sex relations between consenting adults. 7. Introduce a transparent administrative self-identification process for legal gender recognition, free from intrusive requirements. 8. Develop, enact, and enforce comprehensive legislation that criminalizes all forms of discrimination against persons of diverse zodiac. We wish Honduras all success for its review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of India.
Madam Vice President, India warmly welcomes the delegation of Honduras and thanks them for the presentation of their national report. We appreciate the steps taken by Honduras towards the protection and promotion of human rights, such as the establishment of the Ministry of Women's Affairs to combat discrimination and violence against women, and the adoption of the Act for the Prevention of Internal Displacement and the Protection and Care of Internally Displaced Persons. In the spirit of constructive engagement, we recommend the following to Honduras. 1. Strengthen efforts to improve accessibility and quality of health services, especially in rural and remote areas and for disadvantaged groups. 2. Redouble efforts to eradicate poverty and food insecurity, particularly in rural and coastal areas, by expanding universal social security coverage. And 3. Continue efforts to reduce high rates of unemployment and underemployment among disadvantaged groups, including by strengthening their access to technical and vocational training opportunities. We wish Honduras a successful UPR review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Indonesia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Indonesia welcomes Honduras' constructive engagement with the UPR process. We acknowledge Honduras' efforts to advance extensive development on infrastructure aimed at increasing access to essential services for the people, hence fulfilling their human rights. We also welcome the significant reduction in unemployment rate, decreased by half in 2025 compared to 2022, and also the overall rise of wages, including for essential workers like teachers and healthcare providers. In a spirit of constructive engagement, Indonesia recommends that Honduras, 1. Continue strengthening efforts to combat corruption, including by ensuring adequate resources for all relevant institutions responsible for investigating, adjudicating, and preventing corruption cases. 2. Continue enhancing access to quality education, including by ensuring safe school environments and addressing school dropout rates. 3. Expand economic and social protection programs for populations living in rural and remote areas, particularly to address poverty and food security challenges. Indonesia wishes Honduras every success in its UPR. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Iran welcomes the delegation of Honduras and comments its continued engagement in the UPR process. We note the measure undertaken by the government to advance the promotion and protection of civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, Iran offers the following recommendation. 1. Strengthen protection of indigenous and Afro-descendant peoples, ensuring collective land rights and effective participation. 2. Adopt a human rights-based approach to climate policies with special attention to rural and coastal communities. 3. Reinforce social protection, education, and health system, and promote jobs for women and youth. We wish Honduras a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Iraq.
شكرا السيد نائب الرئيس. يرحب وفد العراق برئيس وأعضاء وفد الهند.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. We greet the members of the delegation from Honduras. We commend the efforts they've taken while preparing the report. We also hail Honduras's active participation cooperation with international mechanisms, including the UPR. In a constructive spirit, we have the following recommendations. First, continue the efforts currently undertaken to improve the quality of life and expand social services. Take efforts to develop the education system, thereby ensuring equality and access to education, especially in rural and remote areas. We wish them every success. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ireland.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Ireland welcomes the delegation of Honduras and thanks it for its presentation today. Ireland acknowledges Honduras's efforts to advance human rights domestically and notes progress made since the last UPR cycle. Ireland welcomes that the National Congress adopted the Act for the Prevention of Internal Displacement and the Protection and Care of Internally Displaced Persons in April 2023. This is important legislation to prevent forced displacement and protect and assist victims. We encourage adequate resourcing for the full implementation of the Act. Ireland is concerned about reports of attacks, including by criminal groups, against the judiciary's independence and reprisals against lawyers, judges, and other justice officials involved in combating corruption. Ireland recommends that Honduras, 1. Strengthen and ensure the independence of the National Protection Mechanism for Human Rights Defenders and engage closely with civil society and HRDs to design effective prevention and early warning systems, particularly in rural and Indigenous territories. 2. Amend the criminal code to specifically criminalise marital rape. We wish Honduras every success in this UPR cycle. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Italy.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. We thank the distinguished members of the delegation of Honduras for their national report and today's presentation. Italy appreciates the reform of the Act on the Protection of Human Rights Defenders, journalists and other media professionals and justice operators carried out in 2025. Italy seizes this opportunity to offer Honduras the following recommendations. Adopt effective legal measures to prevent and prosecute violence against women and girls, including femicide and marital rape. Ensure the criminalization of all forms of recruitment and use of children under the age of 18 years by non-state armed groups, and reinforce programs for their protection and social reintegration. Increase efforts to create a safe and enabling environment for human rights defenders according to international standards. Ensure prompt investigations and accountability for attacks on human rights defenders and journalists. We wish Honduras a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to distinguished representative of Jordan.
شكرا السيدة نائبة الرئيس.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The delegation of Jordan welcomes the delegation of the Republic of Honduras, and we wish them every success in the presentation of their national report in the framework of the UPR. We commend the efforts taken by this country to strengthen the rule of law and combat corruption. We hail the progress achieved in the strengthening of the judiciary. We are pleased to see the efforts taken by Honduras to combat human trafficking and protect the victims, as well as the national programs with a view to strengthening vocational education for youth in rural areas. In the framework of this constructive dialogue, we recommend that they strengthen institutional cooperation and work to combat human trafficking and ensure the appropriate services and support for victims. We recommend that they continue educational and training policies to ensure equality of opportunities and improve education in all regions. We wish the Republic of Honduras every success in the implementation of the recommendations and more progress in development and human rights. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kuwait.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. My delegation would like to welcome the delegation of Honduras, and we commend their cooperation with human rights mechanisms, as well as taking positive steps in a number of issues such as women empowerment, social protection, and alleviation of poverty. In a constructive spirit, we recommend first to implement the inclusive education plan and the specialized educational centers for integration of persons with disabilities. Second, to pursue efforts to combat all forms of violence against women and girls and to achieve social protection while giving due interest to issues pertaining to the youth and children. Finally, we wish them a successful outcome, implementation of all recommendations, and achieving more progress in the field of human rights. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Venezuela.
Gracias.
Thank you, Madam President. We warmly welcome the delegation of Honduras, particularly the Secretary of State for Human Rights, Hector Becerra, and we thank them for the presentation. We recognize progress made by the national government in promoting and protecting human rights, as well as the creation of dialogue spaces such as the Interinstitutional National Roundtable on Prevention and Addressing Social Conflicts, and the implementation of the National Plan Public Policy for the Promotion and Protection of Human Rights of the Sovereign People and the Rebuilding of the Homeland 2025-2035. In a constructive spirit, we recommend the following. 1. Move forward with efforts aiming to guarantee justice in cases of discrimination and violence against persons and groups in vulnerable situations. 2. Strengthen implementation of programs aimed at facilitating reintegration of migrants who have returned with a human rights-based approach. 3. Strengthen public policies and national programs aimed at providing comprehensive care to women vis-à-vis healthcare. 4. Create, strengthen, and equip with sustainable resources, public libraries and spaces of science, technology, and innovation, ensuring their free availability as a means to promote equity, inclusion, and the development of scientific thinking. We wish Honduras every success in this UPR. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, that was the last speaker on my list for this review. I now give the floor to His and Her Excellency to address observations and comments that have been raised so far and to make final remarks. Excellencies, you have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Vice President. Excellencies, on behalf of the State of Honduras, representing the constitutionally elected President of the Republic, Idio Xiomara Castro, we reiterate before this Council our unwavering commitment to the principles of international principles of human rights. Dialogue, cooperation, and international solidarity are not mere postulates, but rather they are the strategic pillars to consolidate effective social justice and unrestricted respect for human dignity. We thank colleagues for the constructive spirit that we've seen here today from delegations. The government of Honduras stands in legitimacy accorded to it by the sovereign will of its people and reiterates its commitment to this process. Recommendations will be carefully analysed and assessed in light of this commitment to the promotion, respect and protection of all human rights. Honduras is moving forward with determination towards a future where peace, justice, social justice, economic and climate justice prevail. Thank you. I should like to reiterate our thanks, the thanks voiced by the head of delegation to all delegations that have participated in this dialogue in a constructive spirit, making a series of recommendations for analysis and consideration. I should also like to reiterate Honduras' commitment to the important work of this Council and its mechanisms, particularly the Universal Periodic Review, which is a fundamental instrument for cooperation based on mutual respect, which today more than ever needs to be strengthened and bolstered. Honduras is a multi-ethnic and pluricultural nation situated at the heart of Central America and is undergoing a crucial time in its history. Before this Council, we reaffirm our commitment to democracy, the protection of all human rights, which are essential pillars to make effective the comprehensive development of our peoples. Thank you very much indeed, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. I thank Your Excellencies and the distinguished members of the delegation of Honduras for the presentation and participation in this review. The report of the review will be prepared by the members of the Troika, namely the representatives of Cuba, South Africa, and Switzerland. In accordance with the procedure implemented in 2015, the recommendation section of the report is scheduled for distribution on Tuesday, 11 November at 1800 p.m. Furthermore, I would like to remind you that according to the Council's decision on measures to conserve time and financial resources, adopted at its organizational meeting on 2nd June 2025, The recommendation section of all working group reports will be considered for adoption on 14th November as from 2:30 p.m. The full report, including the summary section, will be circulated by email on Friday, 21 November 2025. This brings us to the end of our meeting. We will reconvene this afternoon at 2:30 p.m. for the review of the United States of America. Speaking time will be 1 minute and 35 seconds for all. Inscribed speakers who wish to withdraw from the list are kindly invited to use the online system event for withdrawals at the latest 30 minutes before the start of the review. I hereby close the 9th meeting of the 50th session of the UPR Working Group.
Thank you.